Chapter 59, The Foggy Test. Chapter 59, The Foggy Test. The reason why Su Zimo did not leave Pingyang Town immediately was to wait for Zhou Dingyun. If Zhou Dingyun was to return to Pingyang Town and he could not find Su Zimo, he would definitely target the Su family instead. The imperial edict might be a deterrence to the states, but it might not be useful to Qi refinement warriors. Moreover, he was the disciple of Iridescent Cloud's palace, which was one of the 5 main clans. Unless Zhou Dingyun died, Su Zimo could not leave in peace. As what Su Zimo had said to Zhou Dingyun, from the moment he let him off, he knew that Zhou Dingyun would be back. It was just that Su Zimo did not know when Zhou Dingyun would be back. But he was willing to wait. Perhaps it was because he could not ease his concern because of Zhou Dingyun, or that he had a sense of nostalgia and attachment to the mansion, the cultivation field, and the particular someone. He had waited for half a year. During the past half a year, Su Zimo was not in a hurry to cultivate the 4th section, Marrow Cleansing of the Mystic Classic of the 12 Demon Kings of the Great Wilderness. Instead, he continued to cultivate the first 3 sections, namely, Body Tempering, Tendons Transformation, and Bones Strengthening, to strengthen his body and to refine the essence in his body that was sealed by the Scarlet Flame Fruit. Su Zimo had moved on to another realm. He had almost reached phenomenal success for the first 3 sections. In his spare time, Su Zimo would also practice archery in the cultivation field. It was due to his hard work in practicing archery in the past half a year that he was able to shoot dozens of arrows accurately at where the heart was. Now that he had killed Zhou Dingyun, Su Zimo no longer had any reason to stay at Pingyang Town. Unexpectedly, he felt an unexplainable sense of loss. Su Zimo went back to the mansion. He stood at the door, watching the peach blossom tree not far away. His eyes were blurred, and he stood there for a long time. The dark clouds seemed to have dispersed, and the moonlight was clear as water. The petals of the peach blossoms fell off the tree. It was like that night 2 years ago. However, the lady was no longer around. Su Zimo recalled a poem that he once read. Last year in this villa on the same day, on blushed face the fine peach blossoms portrayed. Today, oh, you're gone, my fair, but where, please? Peach blossoms are still smiling in spring breeze. When he was young, Su Zimo could not understand the artistic conception of the 4-line poem. And now, Su Zimo was 19 years old. He was no longer young and inexperienced. He could finally understand the sense of sadness that one felt when things had remained the same, but people had changed. Su Zimo would never be able to forget that it was that night when he was at his lowest, feeling frustrated, lost, and helpless, when a lady stood among the falling peach blossoms and brought him into the cultivation world. Su Zimo smiled. He stretched out his hands and closed the door to his mansion slowly. Now that he closed the door, Su Zimo was shutting the mansion and the very precious memory that he held dear to him to a close as well. Only when he reunited with that person would he open the door to this memory. Su Zimo looked forward to that day. After a long time, the sky gradually brightened. Su Zimo took a deep breath, his eyes clearing up. He took out a map made of animal skin from his clothes and looked carefully at it, taking big strides towards a certain direction. A ray of light broke through the dark clouds in the sky behind him. The morning sun rose from the eastern horizon. A new day had begun. In the southwest region of the Great Zhou dynasty, there was a place in the vicinity that was very famous. There would be dense fog all year round. If one watched from afar, it was as if it was enveloped by countless, unpredictable clouds. It was ethereal, and it did not seem like the mortal world. Curious men and women once went into the fog to find out what it was, but they would always end up in the same place that they started out. In the course of time, all the nearby villagers knew that this was the place where immortals resided and mortals were forbidden entry. Every year, there would be a few days whereby the villagers could vaguely see a mountain peak within the thick fog. It towered into the clouds, looking majestic and grandiose. During these few days, the nearby villagers would kneel down in the direction of the mountain peaks, praying for favorable weather and good health. This day, a green-robed scholar came to their village. It was not really accurate to call him a scholar. The man looked handsome. However, there was a long saber at his waist and a sanguine bow at his back. His outfit was quite odd. The green-robed scholar was none other than Su Zimo, who had left Pingyang town. Ji Yaoshue was correct. Su Zimo had indeed thought of joining the Ethereal Peak. On one hand, since even Ji Yaoshue found that the Ethereal Peak was mysterious, it must be extraordinary. On the other hand, since the Ethereal Peak was the closest to the country of Yen, if anything happened, Su Zimo would be able to rush back as soon as possible. It was just that on the map, it only marked the approximate location of the Ethereal Peak. Once Su Zimo reached the place, he was enveloped by thick fog, and he could not find its exact location. Su Zimo had walked for a day, and he always ended up at the same spot. He was clueless. Su Zimo could not see clearly in the thick fog. The visibility was low. Given his eyesight, he could only see 10 meters away. The place seemed like a maze. He kept walking in circles in the thick fog, but he could not find the exit. Weird. Su Zimo was back to the original spot again. He stared at the fog in the distance as he brooded. Ji Yaoshue once told him that if one wanted to join the Ethereal Peak, it was far more difficult than joining other sections. Other than having a high-grade spirit root, there were many tests to pass. Many high-level Qi refinement warriors could not join the Ethereal Peak as well. However, this was exactly what made the Ethereal Peak so attractive to Su Zimo. If it was like the iridescent Clouds Palace where they only took in disciples based on the different grades of spirit root, Su Zimo felt that this kind of sect had nothing special at all. I guess I have to put in some effort to join the Ethereal Peak. Su Zimo vaguely guessed that the thick fog in front of him might be the first test that he had to go through in order to join the Ethereal Peak. If he could not pass this test, he would not be able to see the Ethereal Peak, let alone join the clan. Seeing that it was getting late now, Su Zimo decided to find a place to rest for the night and to think of ways to get through the maze before he decided what to do tomorrow morning. The thick fog in front of him must be there for a reason. It was useless to barge around without a plan. Not far away was a small village. A woman was preparing dinner while a strong man was chopping some wood. A hunter carried his prey on his way home, and 2 elders squatted at the entrance of the village, a table right in front of them, playing chess on the chessboard. Children from the village were playing and running about. This was a happy and pleasant scene. Su Zimo could feel a sense of warmth at this scene. There was a smile on his face as he took quick steps toward the village. "Grandpa, I am Su Zimo, from the country of Yin. I don't have a place to stay for the night. Can I stay at your place for a night?" Su Zimo reached the entrance of the village, making a bow as he asked the 2 elders who were playing chess. The 2 elders did not seem to have heard him. They were engrossed in the game, and they could not be distracted. Su Zimo coughed softly and repeated his question. The 2 elders still did not reply to him. They each held a chess piece as they stared intently at the chessboard. They would make a move occasionally, looking very serious. Su Zimo felt awkward. Since the 2 elders did not respond, it would be rude if Su Zimo rashly entered the village. Su Zimo smiled and turned to leave. Given his abilities, he could sleep in the open. It would not be a problem to him. The reason why he wanted to stay for a night in the village was because Su Zimo could feel a sense of warmth that he had not felt for ages. Just when Su Zimo was about to leave, his eyes inadvertently rested on the chessboard of the 2 elders, and he stopped in his tracks. This was an intense game. The 2 parties were in a stalemate. Even the slightest mistake in every move might cost them the game. Since Su Zimo had nothing else to do, he decided to watch them finish the game before he left. Therefore, he stood by the side to watch them as they played. Fast passes and coins which were spent between 14 January 14 February 2020 will be refunded beginning February 15, 2020, taking 7 working days to be deposited. A new round of trial read selections will begin on February 15, 2020. From February 15, 2020, coins spent on books that aren't selected will be refunded within 30 days. However, fast passes will not be refunded. The selected book will have a mark on the corner of the book cover in 30 days to indicate continuation. Thank you for your understanding. Chapter 60. Breaking Through the Fog. Chapter 60. Breaking Through the Fog. After a long while, the game ended. The elder who was defeated waved his hands, disinterested, mumbling to himself, "I don't feel good today. I will let you win today. Let's play another game tomorrow." The elder placed his hands behind his back, with his palms facing upward, walking leisurely back to the village. The remaining elder had rosy cheeks and looked energetic. He picked up the chessboard, while looking at Suzimo, smiling as he said, "There are very few young men who are as composed as you. Let's go. Follow me to the village." "Thank you, Grandpa." Suzimo smiled, expressed his gratitude, and followed the elder into the village. On the way, Suzimo passed by several villagers. They gave him a glance before returning to whatever they were doing. They did not find it odd. They seemed to have become inured to the unusual. "There is no extra room here. Young man, are you okay with sleeping in the woodshed?" the elder asked. "I am okay with that." Suzimo smiled as he answered. The sky had darkened and most of the villagers had yet to turn in for the night. The elders who had their dinner took leisurely strolls in the village, while the women did their needlework, mending clothes. They led a down-to-earth, simple, and peaceful life. This seemed to be a hidden land of peace and prosperity. There were no bloody fights. Instead, everyone seemed to carry a content smile on their faces. Suzimo sat down at the entrance of the woodshed, watching the scene quietly. He emptied his mind of all thoughts, and the fatigue he felt on the journey seemed to have lightened tremendously. The sky gradually darkened. The moon was bright, and there were few stars. The elderly, the women, and the men had returned to their rooms to rest, except for some energetic and bubbly children who were still playing around on the street, refusing to go home to sleep. Suzimo stood up, returned to the woodshed, and closed the door, getting ready to sleep. Just then, he heard the bright and sweet voice of a young child coming from the village. "Where shall one find the traces of the immortal?" Looking far into the distance of the ethereal peak, it was deep in the mountains where the thick clouds were. Suzimo had an idea. He turned, pushed the door open, and went in the direction of the voice. Not far away was a 7 or 8-year-old child. The child smiled and jumped, moving in his direction. Suzimo thought for a while before he walked forward. He squatted and asked with a smile on his face, "Young child, you were saying something just now. Whom did you hear it from?" "Who said it?" The child bent their head to the side and blinked, looking confused. "I have no idea, but all of us know it." "Is it just a nursery rhyme?" Suzimo mused. "Big brother, are you interested in immortal cultivation?" the child continued to ask. "Yes." Suzimo nodded and smiled. "How do you know?" There was a flicker of craftiness in the child's eyes. The child stuck out the tongue. "Every year there will be many people like you, but most of them won't get to see the immortals." "Haha. What should I do to see them?" Suzimo was interested, feeling like teasing the child. "I don't know as well." The child pouted their lips and shook their head. Suzimo smiled faintly. He was just about to stand up to leave when a thought flashed across his mind. He asked the child, "Where shall one find the traces of the immortal?" looking far into the distance of the ethereal peak. However, the ethereal peak is covered by thick fog. How can one be able to see it? "This is easy." The child raised the chin, feeling proud. "The fog will gradually disperse a few days later. If you stand here, one can vaguely see the mountain peak. However, it will only last for 3 days. If you miss it, you won't be able to see it." Suzimo was elated. As long as he could see the ethereal peak and moved forward in its direction, he would definitely be able to reach the foot of the mountain. Suzimo certainly did not think that he only needed to pass through the thick fog to be able to join the ethereal peak. This was just the beginning. Suzimo stayed in the village for 7 days. On the 7th day, the thick fog gradually dispersed, and he could vaguely see a majestic and towering mountain looming in the distant clouds. Suzimo bade farewell to everyone in the village and stepped into the thick fog once again. In the thick fog, all the senses had been dulled, and one could not have a good sense of direction. Suzimo felt that after turning eastward and westward, he seemed to be retracing his steps at times. As the thick fog gradually dispersed, he could tell the exact location of the peak in the far distance despite being shrouded in fog. Suzimo threw caution to the wind and tried to ignore the wrong impression he had because of his senses, moving forward according to the location of the mountain peak. All of a sudden, gurgling sounds could be heard coming from deep in the fog. It was frightening and eerie. It seemed as if spirit beasts were moving about, stepping on the grass. It was getting closer and closer. A faint, bloody smell wafted over him. Suzimo squinted and stopped, looking in the direction where the sound came from. He waited for a long time, but he did not see any spirit beast. It was a strange feeling. Suzimo did not sense any danger with his spirit perception. However, he had indeed heard the sounds made by the spirit beast and detected its aura coming from that direction. Suzimo spent 1 year in Songlang mountain range. The smell was too familiar. He would never be mistaken about it. Weird. Suzimo murmured and continued to move forward. Roar. Soon after, there was a loud tiger growl. It was deafening, and it had a formidable aura. It proved that the spirit beast was very powerful. It could even be of the same level as a spirit demon. Suzimo frowned. Logically speaking, if there was a powerful spirit beast or spirit demon in front of him, Suzimo should be able to sense the danger with his spirit perception. However, strangely his spirit perception could not detect anything, while his senses kept telling him that there was danger. In this case, there could only be two possibilities. The surrounding fog had shrouded Suzimo's spirit perception, or that it had confused his 5 senses. The answer was obvious. These methods were meant to scare off those who wanted to take the path of immortal cultivation, or those who were weak-minded. The tiger growl and the bloody smell were just methods to deceive people. After figuring out the purpose of the thick fog, Suzimo smiled and ignored all the sounds that he heard from the surroundings, walking deeper into the fog without any care. Nevertheless, it was a brilliant move to make use of the thick fog to confuse one's senses. If Suzimo did not have spirit perception, he would be trembling in fear and taking careful steps along the way. Suzimo gradually sped up, and he walked out of the thick fog in no time. Everything became clear in front of him. As far as the eyes could see, there were verdant and lush vegetation, clear waters, and green hills. It was full of vitality. He felt as if he was in the immortal world. There was a stone gate not too far away. At the back of the stone gate was a mountain road that was paved with green stones. The path winded around the mountain and led all the way to the deep, dark end of the fog. On the 2 sides of the stone gate stood 2 young, smart-looking children who cultivated Tao. One of them was plump, while the other was thin. At the sight of Suzimo, the plump child smiled and nodded. "Young master, you are the first to reach. Please wait here. We will only open the gate and accept disciples 3 days later." Suzimo was not in a hurry. He waited by the side silently. Many people kept coming out from the fog. Most of them were mortals who had not been cultivating. They looked pale, and beads of perspiration could be seen on their forehead. It seemed that they were scared stiff during the journey. Some of them were chi refinement warriors who maneuvered flying swords to break out of the fog. They breathed a sigh of relief upon seeing the stone gate. A few chi refinement warriors swept their gaze over Suzimo. They relaxed slightly upon knowing that he had no spirit chi. Some chi refinement warriors took a glance at the bow and saber that Suzimo had with him and sneered. They could not help but smirk. There were people from all walks of life. 3 days passed in no time. Fast passes and coins which were spent between 14 January 14 February 2020 will be refunded beginning February 15, 2020, taking 7 working days to be deposited. A new round of trial read selections will begin on February 15, 2020. From February 15, 2020, coins spent on books that aren't selected will be refunded within 30 days. However, fast passes will not be refunded. The selected book will have a mark on the corner of the book cover in 30 days to indicate continuation. Thank you for your understanding. Chapter 61, Spirit Testing Stage. Chapter 61, Spirit Testing Stage. Within 3 days, more than 500 people had gathered before the stone gate. Most of them were mortals who had not cultivated before, and there were a couple dozens of chi refinement warriors. Once the 3 days had passed, the fog behind them turned murkier and impenetrable. Even if anyone outside wanted to join Ethereal Peak, they could only wait for the next year by now. Notwithstanding the 500-odd people waiting outside the stone gate, even the 2 children could not really conceal their fatigue after the 3 days as they stood there chatting idly. "Senior brother, how many of these people do you think can get to join the sect?" 5 at most. Through that vast forest, the sound of birds singing and running water was all around. As such, the discussion of the 2 children was almost like mosquito buzzing, and no one could hear them. Yet, within the crowd, a bow and saber-carrying scholar frowned as a look of shock flashed through his eyes. Cultivating the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness did not merely change one's body. The body-tempering aspect would heighten their sense of smell, the tendons transformation aspect their sense of vision, and the bones strengthening aspect their hearing. The changes were all-encompassing. Even though Su Zimo was of the human race, his physical body and 5 senses were even sharper than those of spirit beasts. Despite the soft voices of the 2 children, Su Zimo heard everything clear as day. Only 5 out of the 500 of them could be accepted into the sect. That was a ratio of 1 to 100. How could anyone imagine that? Su Zimo had initially thought that he would be able to enter Ethereal Peak with ease with his borrowed heaven spirit root. But now, it seemed like he couldn't just rely on that. The conditions for one to be able to join Ethereal Peak must be extremely stringent, or there wouldn't be so many people eliminated. Just as Su Zimo was contemplating on what he should do, he heard the 2 children continue. "Who do you think stands a greater chance, senior brother?" "The couple that doesn't really seem to fit in. Even though they're only at level 5 chi condensation, they look like they have an extraordinary aura. They're decent. Oh, that little fatty too. He looks rather sharp, so he should be fine. Junior brother. He's even fatter than you. Hee hee." Su Zimo swept his gaze at him. Amongst the crowd, a man and woman stood by their own somewhere slightly further, not fitting in with the crowd. Su Zimo was around the same age as the man who wore a purple robe with sharp brows and an edged chin. He looked haughty as his hands rested behind his back with eyes closed, standing still. It looked as though he was one with the environment. The woman was wearing a flawless white blouse and looked beautiful like a fairy. Yet, her ravishing looks carried a cold expression where one could sense from a distance away. Su Zimo had a feeling that the reason why the man did not want to fit in was out of disdain, and the woman merely did not want to. As for the little fatty, to be exact, he was not little at all, and looked to be around 16 years old. His neck and waist could not be made out, and he merely resembled a water bucket that had 2 elephant legs as he rolled about the crowd without stopping. His rotund face carried small beady eyes that fluttered about. In just 3 days, he was already one with the crowd. "Senior brother, what about that bow and saber-carrying scholar? Do you think he has a chance?" the fat child asked. Su Zimo was curious when he heard the conversation being steered to him, intrigued to find out what the skinny child thought of him. "That man is a little strange. Even though he's a scholar, he's carrying a huge bow and saber. I suspect that there must be more to his weapons." Right then, a gentle ray of sun shone through the greenery. The sun had risen. Arranging their attire, the 2 children stood on either side of the stone gate with a stern expression. The skinny child spoke. Ethereal Peak's disciple acceptance consists of 3 stages. First is the immortal affinity stage. There is a certain affinity required for one to attain immortality. I believe that all of you have that for being able to make it through the mist here. The second stage is the spirit testing stage. Those with a superior class spirit root, earth spirit root, or heaven spirit root will be able to make it to the 3rd stage once they pass through this gate. The 3rd stage is called the life and death stage. Those who the 2nd stage can head up the stone steps behind me, and you'll pass once you reach the peak. But let me remind you guys, this is an extremely treacherous peak. Any misstep and you'll fall to your death without a corpse. Please do be careful and not force yourselves." At that thought, everyone felt their hearts skip a beat as they all looked unnerved. The reason why they wanted to join Ethereal Peak was because they wanted to attain immortality. If they were to lose their lives joining the sect, how could they achieve immortality? The tip of the peak was shrouded in clouds and could not be seen. It was clear that the path would not be that easy to climb. The dozens of Chi refinement warriors present smiled, looking confident. All of them could tread the skies with their swords. Climbing the peak posed no challenge to them at all. Amongst the group, one of the mortals was dissident as he yelled, "How is this fair? All of those Chi refinement warriors can easily fly their way to the peak, but we have to climb it step by step." "Humph." One of the Chi refinement warriors harumphed coldly and scoffed, "There's nothing such as fairness in this world. If you want to speak of fairness, come to me after you achieve Chi condensation." "You." The mortal was speechless and indignant. The two children of the ethereal sect were not annoyed in the slightest as the fat one chuckled. "Everyone, you're overthinking it. The path is definitely fair for everyone. Even Chi refinement warriors may not be able to reach the peak. If they're not careful, they'll end up losing their lives as well." As though he was about to let something slip, the fat child looked flustered for a moment as he changed his statement. Most people merely thought that the fat child had said something wrong by accident. At that reply, many of the mortals present heaved a sigh of relief. However, the dozens of Chi refinement warriors looked terrible. They had cultivated earnestly with some of them even at level 9 Chi condensation. If they were to die here, just because they wanted to join a sect. Su Zimo glanced sideways. The purple-robed haughty man still had his eyes closed as though he was indifferent to what the two children had said. The white-bloused woman maintained her cold expression with an unyielding gaze that seemed to be frozen. The little fatty among the crowd was still laughing and looking nonchalant. "Come, the first person." The skinny child raised his hand and indicated for the first person to enter the stone gate. It was a level 7 Chi refinement warrior. The man was somewhat nervous as he paused before the stone gate. Bowing to the two children, he smiled and asked, "Fellow Taoists, can an ordinary spirit root work? Is there any leeway?" The two children shook their heads. Sighing, the man walked towards the stone gate. The moment he reached the stone gate, a water barrier appeared across it with 4 shimmering lights. For elements, it was an ordinary spirit root. The man tried his best to barge through the stone gate, but he was blocked by the water barrier. In the blink of an eye, he was bounced back from it. Failure. The fat child looked apologetic as he nodded to the man before raising his voice to the crowd. Next. Chapter 62, Variant Spirit Root. Chapter 62, Variant Spirit Root. Pseudo-Spirit Root fail. Ordinary Spirit Root fail. Superior Class Spirit Root pass. Everyone continued proceeding to the stone gate where more than half of them were rejected. Only those with a superior class and above Spirit Root could get to pass the spirit testing stage. In the blink of an eye, there were only a couple dozens of people left with the haughty man, the white-bloused woman, the little fatty, and Su Zimo. There had yet to be a single heaven spirit root amongst the tested yet. There were tens of earth spirit roots, and the rest were all superior class. The two children could not hide their looks of disappointment as they placed their remaining hope in the last dozens of people. Right then, the little fatty walked through the stone gate all smiles. The moment he reached the stone gate, a roaring sound rang out, scaring everyone. Bang! Boom! Boom! The water barrier turned yellow right away before materializing slowly into a sturdy mud wall. Earth element, Heaven Spirit Root. Out of the 500 over applicants, there was finally a Heaven Spirit Root. The two children nodded to the little fatty with a kind smile, their eyes sparkling. As he crossed the stone gate with ease, he came to the two children with smiles and pulled their hands together like long-lost friends. Casually, he started engaging the both of them in conversation. Both of them were a little stunned, and they nearly spilled everything about themselves within a few mere sentences. At that sight, Su Zimo smirked internally. That little fatty looked to be amiable and cute from the outside, but her was sharper than any of them. Before long, the skinny child was the first one to recover as he coughed gently and swung the little fatty's chubby hand away and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoist, please respect yourself and wait at the side instead of distracting us." Yes, yes. Self-respect. I understand that I've got a huge self to respect, the little fatty giggled without looking awkward at all. The skinny child rolled his eyes and got rid of the little fatty before yelling toward the stone gate, "Next!" Someone tried and failed once more. The number of people remaining was diminishing. Finally, the haughty man opened his eyes as he turned to look at the white-bloused woman not too far away. Giving a slight grin, he headed for the stone gate. His actions attracted everyone's attention. It was as though he was a born ruler where every single move he made would attract the gazes of the masses. The little fatty stopped smiling and looked at the stone gate. Frowning slightly, the white-bloused woman raised her head and her eyes followed the haughty man coldly too. The haughty man stopped himself before the stone gate where the water barrier showed no indication of color. Hee. After a temporary silence, giggles spread from the crowd. What's he putting a show on for when he doesn't even have a spirit root? I know, right? And here I was thinking that he was someone incredible. Wait, something's not right. How did he become a chi refinement warrior without a spirit root? The moment that sentence was spoken, everyone fell silent. It was as though an invisible hand had gripped the mouths of the mocking crowd as they watched with agape eyes. The two children had a stern expression as well. The little fatty was in deep thoughts. As though he had realized something, his chubby body shivered slightly as he could not contain his shock. Ooh, ooh. Right then, a bizarre howling sound came out of the stone gate as the water barrier shimmered, looking like a breeze had just passed through it. Wind element, variant spirit root. The two children yelped. When he heard that, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat too. Of the 5 types of spirit roots, the heaven spirit root was the best and rarest. However, there was a single spirit root that was even rarer than that, the variant spirit root, containing elements such as wind, thunder, ice, light and darkness, etc. One could say that a heaven spirit root could only be found in 1 out of 10,000 men. Yet, a variant spirit root was 10-fold rarer than that. Naturally, a variant spirit root only had a single element as well, and was a type of heaven spirit root. However, that did not mean that it was stronger than the usual 5 elements. It was just extremely rare. The haughty man smiled and crossed the stone gate with ease. Excitedly, the skinny child whispered, "Junior brother, stand guard over here. I'll go inform the peak master and be right back." Yes, yes. Hurry on, senior brother, the fat child replied hastily. Right then, the white-bloused woman outside the stone gate moved as well. Hold on, senior brother. We can wait till this one's done too, the fat Dao child called back the skinny one. Nodding his head, the skinny child watched the white-bloused woman keenly, seemingly even more nervous than her. When she arrived before the stone gate, there was no color on the water barrier still. This time round, no one dared to mock anymore. Could it be another variant spirit root? The eyes of both children widened in disbelief. Everyone else watched the stone gate with bated breath. Crack, crack, crack. Suddenly, a layer of frost covered the water barrier before freezing it into ice. Ice element, variant spirit root. Everyone gasped. It's been tens of years since a variant spirit root has appeared at Ethereal Peak, but now, there's 2 in one go? No, I've got to hurry and report it to the peak master. The skinny child drew out a flying sword and sped towards the back of the peak, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Everyone else watched the haughty man and the white-bloused woman with looks of admiration and respect. The little fatty smiled his way to the white-bloused woman before pandering to her. "Miss, you're so beautiful. I've never seen a woman as beautiful as you in my life. You're even prettier than our village beauty, Sister Kaifeng. It was as though thunder had struck everyone present as they rolled their eyes. That little fatty really did dare to say anything with drivel such as his village beauty, Sister Kaifeng, and whatnot. He wasn't wrong in his words. The white-bloused woman was indeed extremely beautiful. However, most people would not dare to spout such truths, let alone in front of her. Yet, the strange thing was that everything seemed natural and sincere when they came out of the little fatty's mouth without a single bit of awkwardness. If any other women heard such an open and brazen compliment, they would definitely feel shy. However, the girl was unmoved as she glared at the little fatty coldly without saying anything. The little fatty wasn't dissuaded as he slipped away to the haughty man's side before commenting in awe, "Sir, you have such a good figure. I'm really envious." "Get away." The haughty man's lips pursed slightly as he spat out those two words. "Ah, all right." The little fatty nodded his head keenly as he disregarded cleanliness and rolled away on the floor immediately. Because his figure resembled a ball to begin with, his rolling motion indeed made him look less than human. The white-bloused woman's lips twitched as her frostiness diminished slightly, watching with a trace of bemusement. Spying her expression with his sharp eyes, the little fatty stumbled over to the white-bloused woman's side with an intoxicated expression. His eyes seemed as though they were sparkling as he praised, "Wow, you really look so beautiful," smiling. Instantly, the friendliness in the girl's eyes disappeared. However, she stretched out her delicate hand and patted on the little fatty's head, neither harshly nor gently. Smiling with squinted eyes, the little fatty looked to be enjoying it. How could there be someone this shameless? Those were the words that passed through everyone's minds. When the fat child looked at the remaining tins of people and saw nothing special about them, he waved his hand patiently and demanded, "Continue with the test. Hurry up." Su Zimo tidied his clothes before heading up. Chapter 63. He exploded? Chapter 63. He exploded? Su Zimo's actions did not attract anyone's attention. Compared to the haughty man, white-bloused woman and little fatty, he seemed simply way too ordinary apart from his slightly weird dressing. The reason why Su Zimo waited for the end of the test wasn't because he wanted to pull a surprise on everyone. It was because he had no spirit root to begin with. Even though Dai Yu had planted the spirit root for him, he could not help but feel nervous as to whether things would turn out well. Standing still before the stone gate, he watched the water barrier keenly. Swoosh! A red flash of light shimmered through the water barrier before burning into raging flames, exuding a scorching warmth. Su Zimo was elated. Fire element, heaven's spirit root. Apart from the haughty man and white-bloused woman, everyone turned their sights to him. Out of the 500 people, other than the two variant spirit roots, the little fatty was the only earth element heaven's spirit root. Now that Su Zimo was the second, he naturally attracted everyone's attention. Furthermore, those with some knowledge on cultivation knew that a fire spirit root was superior to an earth spirit root. On the one hand, the fire element had the highest killing power amongst the 5 elements. On the other hand, one who possessed the fire element had the chance to become a weapon or elixir refinement master. Those two paths required one to have a high mastery and understanding of the fire element. As such, those with a fire spirit root had an innate advantage. Waiting with a hawk eye by the stone gate, the little fatty was hoping to make his acquaintance as well after Su Zimo passed through it. The fat Dao child was standing at the side idly as he let out a casual, surprised remark. Smiling, he then nodded and said, "Not bad, not bad. Come on over, sir." After all, the fat child had his fill of surprises after the appearance of 2 consecutive variant spirit roots, and hence the reason for his less than enthused response. Right then, no one had noticed anything strange about Su Zimo just yet. He stood before the stone gate motionlessly instead of crossing right away. It wasn't that he did not want to, the stone gate was stopping him. He could feel a strong resistance that was trying to keep him out of the gate. In theory, the water barrier would only block out those without, or those who possess a pseudo and ordinary spirit root. Yet, the scarlet water barrier was resisting Su Zimo, who clearly possessed a heaven spirit root. If not for the fact that he had an extremely strong physique, he would have been sent flying like the first chi refinement warrior. How could this be? Su Zimo strategized as he fought against the resistance of the water barrier. He knew his background clearer than anyone else. He was someone without a spirit root to begin with. It was only natural for the stone gate to resist him at that thought. But what was up with the clear indication of his fire spirit root? If he were to continue with this stalemate, notwithstanding the fat child of Ethereal sect, even everyone else would realize that something was wrong and Su Zimo's efforts would have been wasted. Indignant. Su Zimo was indignant. Why? He had already come so far just to be stopped by a single stone gate. With a darkened expression, he moved towards the water barrier and took a fierce step. Su Zimo had already displayed the stance for the plow heaven stride with his single step. Instantly, he gave off such a menacing aura that even the fat child at the stone gate jumped in shock. MMM? As though he had sensed something, the haughty man opened his eyes and looked towards the stone gate. Turning her head slightly, the white-bloused woman frowned gently too. Everyone found themselves witnessing the strangest scene ever. Even though Su Zimo was almost entirely through the stone gate, the scarlet water barrier did not dissipate at all. Instead, it wrapped around him like an elastic veil that was trying its best to stop him. It stunned everyone present. What was going on? Fire element, heaven's spirit root. That's right. But why would the stone gate try to prevent this man? It was a wrestle between Su Zimo and the scarlet water barrier. All of a sudden, squinting his eyes, Su Zimo's body rang out with crackling sounds, and his entire body seemed as though it had enlarged. With his tendons and bones cracking together, he gave a soft yell and strode out once more. Swoosh! The water barrier shattered and fell to the ground. Having successfully passed the stone gate, Su Zimo's expression relaxed as he heaved out a sigh of relief before walking to the fat child. Right as he was about to speak, he saw a weird look in the fat child's eye as the latter glared behind him intently. Snap! Suddenly, a boom sounded out from behind Su Zimo. He turned around instinctively only to witness a fissure forming on the crossbeam of the mighty 30-foot stone gate. Crack! 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 Before anyone realized what was going on, the fissure spread out swiftly and in the blink of an eye, filled the entire stone gate with dense, horrifying cracks. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. Bang! Boom! Boom! Along with a huge crash, the stone gate crumbled right before everyone's eyes just like that, turning into a pile of rocks with dust clouds flying about. What followed was a deathly silence. Everyone's faces froze right away. The haughty man scowled while a look of surprise filled the white-bloused woman's face as her mouth gaped slightly, losing her previous demeanor. The little fatty was so rattled that his eyeballs were almost popping out. He exploded. The fat child was completely lost as his mind and eyes went blank. It was already phenomenal enough for variant spirit roots to make their appearance in the test, such that his senior brother had gone off to inform their peak master about it. But what was up with this scholar before him? He had caused the entire stone gate to explode with a simple spirit root test. Unnerved, Su Zimo coughed gently before revealing a friendly smile to the fat child. Fellow Taoist, I suppose that stone gate must be really old, huh? Yes. The fat child replied automatically, It's been a couple thousand years now. That must be it then. Su Zimo nodded his head and continued solemnly. It's only natural for problems to arise since the gate has been here for such a long time, enduring the weather all round the year. How unfortunate that I had to come across its demise. Huh. The fat child's jaw almost dropped to the ground. Su Zimo patted the fat child on the shoulder and reminded sincerely, This may not be a bad thing though. At least, it serves as a reminder for the sect to conduct constant maintenance to some of the older structures you guys have so that today's situation does not repeat itself. These issues have to be nipped in the bud before they are allowed to manifest. The fat child was befuddled to begin with through the confusion. With Su Zimo's explanation, he was even more astounded and was almost convinced. In reality, the stone gate was initially a gigantic spirit-testing stone with its middle dug out by the cultivators of Ethereal sect and placed here, turning into the stone gate they perceive today. The spirit-testing stone was a spirit item of the universe and was extremely perceptive to spirit roots. There was no way it would be destroyed through a lack of maintenance. If no one had destroyed it, it could have lasted for even millions of years without any issues. The little fatty was the first to react as his eyes flickered, glancing at Su Zimo while raising a thumbs up. He knew that he was not at Su Zimo's level where the latter could spout nonsense with a straight face. As such, he could not help but feel impressed. Su Zimo could not help but feel guilty. Everything had gone beyond his expectations. Even though what he said was akin to duping kids, it was better than having his background exposed. Chapter 64, Life and Death Stage. Chapter 64, Life and Death Stage. The fat child was thoroughly confused by Su Zimo as he froze for a long time without understanding what had happened, pointing at Su Zimo and stammering, Why you? I'll go let the Peak Master know about this too. Shrugging his head as though trying to clear his mind, the fat child patted his storage bag and summoned a flying sword before speeding to the back of the peak. In the blink of an eye, both children guarding this place had disappeared. Unnerved, the fat child had left in a hurry without saying anything else. The little fatty seemed to be extremely interested in Su Zimo. With bright, shimmering eyes, he stumbled over and bowed. Sir, how did you do it? Can you teach me? With an unchanging expression, Su Zimo shook his head. That has nothing to do with me. Even though he said that, his heart whispered another tune. There were only two reasons why the stone gate blocked him. First, it was because he was a cultivator without a spirit root to begin with. Second, even though it was also a heaven spirit root, the fire spirit root that Dai Yu gave him was different from normal ones. Su Zimo could not tell which of the two reasons it was. After the spirit testing stage, there were only 80 out of the 500 left with more than 20 Chi refinement warriors. Based on the order of events, the remaining 80 people should head up the peak through the path beyond the stone gate so that they could proceed with the third stage, life and death. However, with the two children from Ethereal sect gone, everyone was lost as to whether they should continue with the original plan or wait where they were. Right then, the haughty man chuckled and started ascending the peak. His actions caused everyone to waver. The two children had mentioned earlier that the third stage was merely to head up the peak through the path. However, everyone knew that if they could be the first to reach the peak, their chances of being accepted would be much higher. After the haughty man, the white-bloused woman made her move too. Exchanging glances, everyone else followed suit immediately. The path was made from green stones and was neither rugged nor tough. Instead, the journey was picturesque with luscious greenery and the soothing melody of birds singing. As they traversed through the clouds with the accompanying scenery, it was as though they were in paradise. Everything felt relaxing, unlike a treacherous life and death stage. Su Zimo was in no hurry as he hung around at the back of the pack. He felt that since Ethereal sect set this stage, it wouldn't be to give the first person who reached the peak an advantage. It was way too cliché and wasn't a fair method given the number of people present. Finally, if it was that simple, it wouldn't be named Life and Death Stage. After Su Zimo destroyed the entire stone gate for a mere test, the little fatty was now hanging around him instead of the haughty man and the white-bloused woman, chatting non-stop the entire way. Worried that he may let his background slip, Su Zimo was rather distracted as he only replied casually every now and then. Bro, everyone went through the spirit root testing so ordinarily, but your test was like a fart to Mother Nature. Why do you say that? Because it was loud and clear. Bro, you seem like you have a dignified demeanor. I suppose you have quite the extraordinary background? I've studied for a couple of years in the past. My bro, that's like a rare gem in the crowd. You can both study and fight. Su Zimo finally understood the powers of the little fatty as he hurried ahead, wanting to bury himself into the crowd. Right then, the people up ahead stopped in their tracks. Su Zimo looked up and frowned. That was the end of the mountain path. Everyone found themselves facing a steep peak that extended into the clouds boundlessly. The true test had arrived. The smooth mountain road was merely a warm-up. The many mortals present looked up at the peak solemnly. For them, the only way they could reach the top was to climb by hand. However, the peak was simply way too steep that there was barely any edge for them to grab onto. On both sides of the mountain road was a deep abyss where a single misstep would mean certain death. Everyone could not help but recall the words of the children. This was a stage treacherous like no other. Any single mistake, and they would find themselves dead without a corpse. Hence, they should be careful and not force themselves. Many of the mortals could not hide their fear in their expression as they gave up internally. There were some who were indignant about things and whispered in discussion. Ethereal sect is way too much. They're trying to get us killed just to join them. Isn't that right? It's not as though our spirit root is lousy as well. If push comes to shove, we can just join some other sections. That would be better than dying here. I don't even know how high this peak is. What if we climb halfway up and run out of energy? Unlike the many mortals, the 20-odd chi refinement warriors present looked relaxed. While this mountain may seem insurmountable to mortals, all they had to do was ride their flying swords and rise endlessly. One of the chi refinement warriors pulled out a flying sword from his storage bag, and with a single leap, he chuckled with a suave expression. All right, I'll make a move first and await you guys at the peak. Right after, he soared into the skies and disappeared into the clouds in the blink of an eye. Not willing to lose out, the other chi refinement warriors took out their spirit weapons and followed suit. Yet, the strange thing was that the haughty man did not move at all. Instead, he frowned and gazed into the clouds, contemplating about something. It was the same for the white-bloused woman as she stood there in deep thoughts. Some of the mortals gathered their courage and began climbing the peak. Compared to the chi refinement warriors, they were much slower and every single step was horrifying. A single misstep and they would fall right into the abyss. Bro, aren't you moving? The little fatty looked at Su Zimo. Right as he was about to reply, a shriek rang out from the clouds. Ah! Everyone's heart skipped a beat. In the blink of an eye, a shadow fell from the clouds and glided through everyone's vision into the dark abyss beneath. At that sight, everyone's expressions turned grim as chills ran down their spines. The person who had fallen was the chi refinement warrior who had moved first. A chi refinement warrior was dead just like that? What had he encountered up there? The clouds rumbled and shifted, emanating a chilling, killing intent. Ah! It was yet another shriek. A shadow fluttered by them and dunked into the depths of the abyss. Gulp, gulp. The place rang out with everyone's gulping sounds. In just a mere short while, 2 chi refinement warriors had fallen to their deaths. The 2 children were right. The third stage was fair for everyone such that even chi refinement warriors may not be able to reach the peak. The few mortals that had just started climbing up the peak found themselves getting cold feet as they watched everything unfold in utter horror. There were already people who had started to climb down. What kind of a joke was that? There was no need for them to take such a risk when even chi refinement warriors have died. Suddenly, the haughty man laughed and mumbled, "Life and death stage, life and death stage. The peak represents life while the abyss represents death. Interesting. Challenging." Chapter 65, Crane Obstacle. Chapter 65, Crane Obstacle. The way most of them looked at the haughty man had changed. While everyone else was scared to death and wanted to back off, he was the only one who looked raring to go without a single bit of fear. Ah! Ah! Yet another chain of shrieks as the chi refinement warriors who had moved ahead first fell from the clouds one after another, disappearing into the abyss on either side of the mountain path. Finally, there were people who could take it no longer as they started backtracking. The little fatty held his tongue and exclaimed, Even a level 9 chi refinement warrior fell down. Just what did they encounter in the clouds? Su Zimo saw everything even clearer. There were a total of 23 chi refinement warriors who soared into the skies. In the blink of an eye, every single one of them had fallen. That was a little horrifying. Many mortals started climbing down the walls, looking terrified with trembling feet. Without even turning back, they dashed down the mountain path. There were more than 80 people who had passed the second stage. Now, all the 23 chi refinement warriors have already failed. Coupled with the mortals who had left, there were only 17 people left at the base of the peak. All of the 17 were resolute warriors who did not show the slightest look of fear in their eyes, even at the sight of all those chi refinement warriors falling over. Even the little fatty who was chattering the entire way merrily had gone silent, his beady eyes fluttering about as he was deep in thoughts. Su Zimo had always felt something unusual about this stage, as everything seemed suspicious. However, he could not point out just what exactly was wrong. At almost the same time, both the haughty man and white-bloused woman summoned a flying sword and soared to the skies. However, their speed was clearly slower. It was clear that both of them were being wary about the situation as well. Bro, remember to be careful. I'll scout the way for you first. The little fatty was also a chi refinement warrior as he retrieved a small shield from his storage bag. The shield expanded with the wind and carried his rotund body into the skies slowly. The remaining 14 people inclusive of Su Zimo were mortals who had no spirit chi within them. If they wanted to ascend the peak, they would have to climb the peak step by step physically. Su Zimo hesitated no more as he approached the base of the peak. With a nimble leap, he hung onto the walls and started climbing up swiftly. That shocked the remaining 13 people as they almost mistook him for a monkey instead of a human climbing the peak. By now, Su Zimo had almost perfected his tendons transformation. He was nimble like a python and agile like an ape. Moving with ease, the peak posed no challenge to him at all. Apes were natural-born climbers. If Su Zimo had given it his all, even chi refinement warriors who could soar through the skies may not even be able to match his speed. Previously at the Tianhuang mountain range, even when Elder Qian of Joyful Clan soared through the skies, Su Zimo's speed while climbing the towering old tree matched his. Of course, Su Zimo had used his sanguine ape transformation at that time, and Elder Qian was only a foundation establishment cultivator. Even without using all his strength, Su Zimo had left the 13 remaining mortals far behind his tail. Caw caw. Right then, Su Zimo vaguely picked up on some birds crying out. Even though he had lived a year in Tianhuang mountain range, he still could not understand the language of beasts. However, he could tell of how they felt through their sounds. Those birds clearly sounded happy and mocking. Why are there spirit beasts here? He frowned as he continued climbing without slowing down at all. Bastard, how dare you? Before long, the voice of the haughty man hollered out above. Su Zimo raised his head and gazed over, squinting his eyes. Far beyond the clouds, a gigantic bird was extending its wings while cawing out with a raised head. Su Zimo could faintly make out the bird assaulting the haughty man, white-bloused woman and little fatty in midair. Every single gentle flap of its wings brought about a hurricane as all three of them swayed back and forth midair, looking as though they could fall any time. A spirit demon? Su Zimo was stunned. The bird exuded an aura that was the same as spirit demons. It looked as though it had just become a spirit demon equivalent to a foundation establishment cultivator. Even then, its strength was enough to hold out against the three of them. It was clear that the bird had not used its full strength. Instead, it was running circles around the three of them like a cat circling a rat, flapping its wings from time to time so that none of them could ascend further. The haughty man had a wind spirit root to begin with and thus was barely able to maintain his balance despite swaying in the wind. The white-bloused woman had a frozen expression. She was encased by a transparent ice barrier. It was clear that she had already used a talisman. As for the little fatty, his shield was steady and spacious. He sprawled on it, gripping onto its edges tightly with sweat pouring down his puffy face, looking all nervous. So, this is the obstacle of the life and death stage. One would be able to reach the peak if they could get through this bird. Now that he understood the reason, Su Zimo was prepared to continue climbing. Right then, the little fatty shrieked. Perhaps because the bird saw that Su Zimo and the others were approaching as well, it seemed as though it no longer wanted to waste time as it flapped its wings furiously. The little fatty was the first one to lose control as he fell from midair with his shield blown into oblivion. Ah! His face was pale as a sheet as he flailed his arms, crying out loudly. When he caught sight of Su Zimo above him, he called, "Bro, run! There's a fierce bird up there." The place where the little fatty fell was not too far away from Su Zimo. Su Zimo had a decent impression of the little fatty and was not about to leave the ladder in the lurch. With a swift motion, he strode horizontally across the wall and grabbed the little fatty from midair. By then, the little fatty's eyes were rolled over while he drooled all over, seemingly passed out of fear. Su Zimo frowned. He was already halfway through the climb. If he were to put the little fatty down, he would have to repeat an entire journey once more. Even though the little fatty was heavy, he was nothing compared to the cold moon saber and sanguine crystal bow hanging on his waist. At that thought, Su Zimo grabbed the little fatty with one arm, while continuing to climb with another without slowing down at all. It was only after he got closer that he managed to make things out clearly. It was a crane that looked to be in its infancy stage, its eyes filled with merry excitement. It was as though making the climber's fall was the most fun game it ever played. Swooping down, the crane extended its claws and landed on the white-bloused woman's talisman ice barrier. Crack, crack. The barrier began cracking as the crane clawed at it with ease. With a strong gust of wind, the woman then fell from her sword. Even though her gaze looked slightly dim, she did not make a single peep of disgruntlement as she disappeared into the abyss. The haughty man followed soon after, holding out for not much longer under the attacks of the crane as he fell through the skies looking indignant. Caw, caw. Rearing its head, the crane looked extremely gleeful. Chapter 66, An Ape. Chapter 66, An Ape. When he saw the haughty man and white-bloused woman falling into the abyss, Su Zimo was finally clear about one thing. Those that fall into the abyss will definitely not die. Since the two of them possessed a variant spirit root and the peak master of Ethereal Peak already knew about it, there was no way they would be allowed to die. However, Su Zimo did not know what those who fell into the abyss would encounter. Shifting horizontally, Su Zimo dodged from the crane's line of sight and continued speeding up the peak. Even though he only had one hand, his feet were as nimble as his fingers after he removed his shoes. Digging themselves into the wall of the peak, he continued climbing steadily. The crane had extremely sharp senses. With a swift flap, it appeared above Su Zimo's head and cried out, looking at him with a taunting expression as though mocking his little play of trying to dodge it. The man and crane had finally met. On a peak enshrouded with spirit chi elsewhere, two grace middle-aged cultivators sat opposite to one another. They were both clad in white robes, and one of them had a flying sword emblem engraved on his sleeve, while the other had a hexagon emblem. Both of them were sipping tea lazily. Beside them stood a skinny child who was relating something excitedly. Variant spirit root? Two of them? One of them placed his teacup down and turned around to ask, his expression slightly changed. The skinny child nodded furiously. The other cultivator asked, what spirit roots were they? One is wind and the other is ice. At that, the two cultivators exchanged glances and smiled, apparently pleased. Wen Xian, your peak's about to produce two more geniuses. There were 6 peaks to Ethereal Peak, where the highest amongst them was the true Ethereal Peak that was visible to the outside world. Surrounding it were 5 other peaks: Spirit, Elixir, Talisman, Array, and Weapon. The cultivator known as Wen Xian, the one with a flying sword emblem embossed, was the peak master of Spirit Peak. The other person was Xian Yi, peak master of Array Peak. Naturally, Anyone who could be a peak master was definitely a perfected golden core. Even though all the peaks had their specialties, Spirit Peak was the strongest amongst them with the most disciples. Because they valued cultivation realms the most highly, everything they learned and imparted were killing techniques. If there were variant and heaven spirit roots, they would most likely be selected by Spirit Peak. When Xin smiled and stood up, I'll go take a look and see how many tribulations of the life and death stage those two can pass. Don't worry. Those with variant spirit roots are blessed by providence. They'll naturally be able to pass the tribulation of life and death. A teasing expression flickered by the eyes of Peak Master Xian Yi as he joked. Look how anxious you are. Where's your poise as a Peak Master? Come, join me to take a look. With a hearty laugh, when Xian tugged at Xian Yi's wrist and wanted to leave together. Shaking his head, Xian Yi ducked away and laughed. I'm not going. Won't I be giving myself troubles by watching your Spirit Peak take all the good talents away? Right then, a chubby fat child ran over in a huff. Peak Master. TT, this is bad. MMM? Both Peak Masters exchanged glances, looking surprised. Why are you here too, junior brother? The skinny child asked. Sweating from head to toe, the fat child waved his lumpy hand and cried out, Peak Master, the spirit testing gate exploded. Exploded? Xian Yi and Wen Xian looked at one another confused. When Xian asked, why would it explode? Someone destroyed it? No. The fat child shook his head before nodding fervently. Yes. Wait. No. No. Both Peak Masters were thoroughly confused. Just what in the world happened? Speak properly. When Xian hollered with a solemn expression, the fat child could not help but recall the words of that scholar. Instinctively, he repeated, it might be because the spirit testing gate had been enduring the rough weather for such a long time without proper maintenance. That's why it broke apart. Bam! When Xian flicked the fat child on the head. Ow! Clutching his head, he pursed his lips sadly. What nonsense! Xian Yi could not hide his smile as he chuckled. Who taught you that? I'm sure you didn't think up that on your own, right? A scholar told me that, the fat child replied, but I think what he said makes sense too. And he was even kind enough to have me remind the sect to take care of our old structures so that, bam! Yet another flick. Instantly, a big, swollen bump appeared on the forehead of the fat child. He was almost bursting into tears as he asked with teary eyes, Peak Master, why are you hitting me? You're too silly, child. One day, you might even end up counting money for the man who sells you out. Xian Yi did not know to laugh or to cry. When Xian spoke sternly, tell me the entire series of events. Do not hide anything from me. There was this scholar carrying a bow and saber. He came before the spirit testing gate and it displayed a fire spirit root, the fat child answered. Carry on. But the spirit testing gate did not allow him to enter. The scholar then continued barging through, and the spirit testing gate exploded. When Xian and Xian Yi frowned and exchanged glances, still confused. When Xian asked right away, are you sure it was a fire spirit root? Yes. The fat child replied instantly, Peak Master, you've got to believe me. Even though I'm stupid, I can still tell that it's a fire spirit root. That's strange. Xian Yi could not figure out what happened. After a moment of silence, Xian Yi spoke, Wen Xian, I'll accompany you to see just what is up with this scholar. Without the use of any spirit weapons, the both of them soared through the skies and with a flip of their robes, carried the two children with them towards the front of the peak. Before long, all four of them arrived at where the spirit testing gate was. It's indeed broken. Xian Yi stared at the lump of rocks beneath him where the spirit testing gate once stood and murmured silently. When Xian asked, where's that scholar? He's gone. The fat child looked around. Suddenly, Xian Yi replied, no, they're up the peak. The 8 distresses formation of the abyss has already been activated. Yes, those two with the variant spirit roots are there already. When Xian asked hurriedly, how many tribulations have the two of them gone through? They've already passed 2, life and death. You can rest easy now, right? Xianyi chuckled. After pausing slightly, Xianyi shook his head. Wait, the bow and saber-carrying scholar isn't going through the 8 distresses formation. He might have left already out of fear. When Xian harumphed gently, this unknown lad appeared and destroyed our ethereal sect's spirit-testing gate and left just like that? Brazen. Caw caw. Right then, the hurried calls of a crane rang out from beyond the clouds. When Xian and Xianyi looked up, far above, a figure was shifting nimbly around the walls of the peak without falling off. Even while dodging the attacks of the crane, the figure was still climbing to the peak rapidly. Even with the eyesight of a perfected golden core, they could not see clearly due to the distance between them and the tip of the peak. Xianyi, look, there's an ape. When Xian said as he pointed to a black shadow on the peak. Chapter 67, Full Effort Face-Off. Chapter 67, Full Effort Face-Off. When he heard that, Xianyi laughed. Fufu, what a sharp ape. Even he knows that we're one of the 5 main sects of the great Zhou dynasty, and that's why he wants to be accepted as a disciple of this fortuitous sect. Yes, that ape's quite agile. I wonder how long it can last under the attacks of our Lil Crane. Listen, Lil Crane seems to be angry, huh? Poor ape. Come on, let's go check it out. When Xian and Xianyi were both smiling and relaxed as they soared towards the peak, carrying a child each. As they approached, when Xian and Xianyi found their smiles disappearing as they tore through the layers of mist. Instead, it looked as though they were witnessing something unbelievable. After a momentary silence, cough, that black shadow, doesn't seem to be an ape? Xianyi pointed to a black figure climbing to the peak as he coughed and asked hesitantly. Yes, it seems to be a human, when Xian smiled dryly, looking awkward. Both of them could not help but feel their faces flushing after committing such an elementary mistake despite being peak masters. But in truth, it was no wonder why they were mistaken. From a distance where the black figure was murky, it was leaping left and right like an agile ape. Even though both of them were perfected golden cores with an immense amount of knowledge, they would not have thought that the figure was a human. As they got closer, their expressions changed once more. That doesn't seem to be a human. Yes, there are 2 of them. After yet another momentary silence, when Xian could not help but grumble unhappily, what the hell is wrong with that person? If he wants to climb the peak, so be it. Why is he even carrying a fatty with him? Wait, that man's carrying a bow and saber too. Haven't I just heard of someone with that getup? Xianyi remarked suddenly. Right then, the fat child beside when Xian pointed at the figure excitedly and yelled, Peak Master! That's him! That's the scholar! On the steep mountain peak. Each time the crane flapped its wings, Su Zimo clung tightly onto the wall with his fingers and feet dug deeply into the rocks. Against Su Zimo's fingers, those sturdy rocks seemed as soft as tofu. For any mortal, they would have to find places they could step on if they wanted to climb the peak. However, that was not the case for Su Zimo. If not for the crane blocking his path, the peak he was climbing would be akin to flat ground for him. As of now, all the mortals after Su Zimo had already fell due to the crane's flaps. He was the only one still climbing. To be exact, there were 2 mortals left. He was carrying the little fatty too. The crane's eyes shone with rage as it cried out. Soaring into the skies, it swooped down at Su Zimo with its sharp talons. That was a vicious dive. Su Zimo wanted to dodge, but it was too late. In the blink of an eye, he let go of his hand suddenly as he swayed dangerously in midair. He then reached out and dug himself into the wall once more. Snap! A large rock above Su Zimo's head was smashed into dust by the crane's sharp talons as everything sprayed down on his face. However, he was unaware of it. When some of the rocks smashed on the little fatty's body, that rotund body trembled obviously. Suddenly, Su Zimo realized something as he dangled the little fatty in midair and hollered, "Stop pretending, or I'll toss you down." The little fatty's eyes burst wide open as he replied hurriedly, Please don't scare me, bro. I know my mistakes now. Do you still want to reach the peak? Su Zimo asked quickly. Yes, of course. Hold on to my back on your own. Don't blame me if you fall. Yes, yes. The little fatty shifted quickly and wrapped his arms and legs around Su Zimo's neck and waist like an octopus. That way, even though Su Zimo was still carrying an additional man, he had both hands to work with. At the start, the crane's attacks weren't ferocious. It was clear that its aim was not to injure. It merely wanted to deter Su Zimo from climbing further. After multiple failed attempts, the crane was frustrated. That was why if Su Zimo had not managed to dodge the previous attack, his brains might have been crushed by the crane's talons. He did not dare to be careless against an enraged, early-stage Foundation establishment spirit demon. That was why he got the little fatty to a piggyback position, so that he could have two hands to contend against the demon. In all fairness, Su Zimo was only at the third section of the Mystic Classic of the 12 Demon Kings of the Great Wilderness and was not a match for the spirit demon yet, even if it was only at early-stage Foundation establishment. However, Su Zimo's goal was not to fight it out with the crane. Instead, he merely wanted to dodge it and reach the peak. With that, things were much simpler. Swoosh! The crane dove once more as Su Zimo's eyes shone brightly. Pushing his legs, he continued striding horizontally on the smooth walls of the peak as he dodged the attacks of the crane while climbing up swiftly. Crack! 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 Su Zimo's fingers and feet dug deep into the rocks. His speed was not inferior to when he was on the ground. Caw, caw! When the crane caught sight of that, it was even more enraged as it soared through the skies and burst off like a rocket, appearing behind Su Zimo and attacking relentlessly with its talons and beak. Its long beak was even sharper than a flying sword, such that every single poke sent a sharp, ringing sound reverberating through Su Zimo's ears. As long as the beak pierced him, there would definitely be a bloody hole on his body. The little fatty was so scared that he was shivering with his eyes closed tightly. Su Zimo dodged repeatedly as his tendons cried out. With every single expansion and contraction, his blood would be filled as his large tendon convulsed intensely, pushing his body to its limits. Using just his spirit perception, Su Zimo dodged the attack of the crane countless times as he continued climbing. The cries of the crane were getting more hurried, and in fact, there was even a hint of killing intent. He was getting closer to the top of the peak. At the same time, the crane's attacks were getting fiercer too. As the two Dao children looked at everything unfold from the top of the peak, they were sweating from head to toe for the scholar, as though they were the ones being attacked right at that moment. The man and the crane contended against one another on the steep peak. Even though the man seemed unable to fight back, it was still extremely dangerous and intense. Any bit slower, and the scholar could very well be dead in the talons of the crane. When Xian and Xian Yi had equally grim looks on their faces as they watched fixedly, prepared to save him if need be. To think that the scholar would still have strength left to be able to continue climbing while defending against our Lil Crane's attack, Xian Yi's tone was somewhat amazed. When Xian commented solemnly, "If I'm not mistaken, the bow and saber on the scholar's waist are made from spiritual items. Even though those are pseudo-spirit weapons, they weigh more than an entire ton together." When Xian's remark had a clear meaning behind it. If Su Zimo had not been carrying the sanguine crystal bow and cold moon saber, he would have been even more agile and might have even reached the top of the peak by now. When Xian and Xian Yi exchanged glances, there was a common consensus as a thought flashed through their minds. This scholar is interesting. Chapter 68. Ascending the Peak. Chapter 68. Ascending the Peak. How did this lad train his body? That level of nimbleness, harmony, and stretchability is something that even a spirit beast can't match. His movements resemble an ape and python, yet there are many differences. He might have learnt them through observing wild beasts. Seems like this lad is rather talented. I wonder how many tribulations of the 8 distresses formation he can pass. At that, both Wen Xian and Xian Yi froze with a startled expression. When Xian murmured softly, The 8 distresses formation is set up within the abyss beneath. If this lad truly ascends the peak, wouldn't it be equivalent to him passing the 8 distresses formation? On the surface, Ethereal Sect's third life and death stage was for the cultivators to ascend the peak. However, in reality, they had set an obstacle, and it was intended for everyone to fall into the realm of the 8 distresses formation within the abyss. That was the reason why the fat child had almost let slip at the beginning of things. After all, no one would be able to ascend the peak. Only those who managed to pass through life and death tribulations within the 8 distresses formation would be sent to the top of the peak, where they would be able to join the sect. If they failed the 2 tribulations, they would be teleported outside and would not be able to join the sect. At the same time, those cultivators would not know what had happened at all, merely feeling fortunate that they did not die. The 8 distresses formation was a type of illusory formation that consisted of 8 tribulations: life, age, illness, death, meeting with what they hate, parting with what they love, unattained love, and all ills of the 5 skandhas of Buddhism. There were 2 reasons why they had to beat around the bush by requesting the cultivators to climb the peak before knocking them down. First, the steep peak would first deter the cowards and those who lack resolve. Immortal cultivation was a heavenly defying act and was a path of extreme difficulty. If even those who had resolves of steel and bravery may not even reach the endpoint, there was no room for cowards at all. Second, if everyone were mentally prepared that they would be faced with the 8 distresses formation, the illusory realm would not be able to bewitch them that easily. Ethereal Sect would not be able to achieve their full aim. In the cultivation world, be it illusory skills or formations, there would definitely be distinct loopholes to it. If the affected party were to be able to maintain their composure and alertness, they would be able to see through it and would not be bewitched by it. However, by sending the masses up the peak before beating them down, no one would be prepared, and as they were faced with death, they would definitely panic before they enter the 8 distresses formation of the abyss. Right then, with everyone assuming that they were dead, they would then accept the illusory realm and go through the death tribulation. Once they pass the death tribulation and endure through the life tribulation, they would be considered to have passed the 3rd stage of Ethereal Sect's tests and would be able to join the sect. Of course, there were 8 tribulations to the 8 distresses formation, and the more tribulations one could pass, the better. This was not just a simple test, it was a rite of passage for the mind. After all, everyone would have to endure the pain of the 8 distresses in their lifetime, and cultivators were no exception to it. Yet, a problem had appeared. If Su Zimo managed to ascend the peak, Ethereal Sect's 3rd stage would have been set for nothing. When Xian lowered his voice further and said, "Let me attack and strike him down secretly. We can't go against the rules of the sect by accepting someone that hasn't gone through the 3rd stage." Xian shook his head and chuckled. "No matter. Right now, I'm honestly curious as to whether he can ascend the peak with just his own strength." Pausing for a moment, Xian Yi's eyes lit up as he remarked gruffly, "If the lad truly manages to ascend, I'll set an array formation for him myself to let him have a full taste of the 8 distresses formation." As the peak master of Array Peak, the 8 distresses formation was his masterpiece. For a peak master to declare that he wanted to lay an array formation personally for an unknown scholar was something that had never occurred through the history of Ethereal Sect. On the wall, the man and the crane were still going at it. Su Zimo was already sweating all over. His eyes remained bright as always, emanating an endless fight in them. Initially, the little fatty kept his eyes shut and was extremely frightened. However, he was now fully excited, yelling from time to time from Su Zimo's back to taunt the crane. Caw caw. Despite trying everything, the crane could not stop Su Zimo in his tracks at all. Coupled with the little fatty's mocking, it was even more furious, and its attacks turned fiercer. Su Zimo was pent up as well after being chased by the crane for such a long time. Seeing that he was merely a step away from the top of the peak, Su Zimo took in a deep breath and circulated the Anaconda Eclipse's Mind Sutra before bellowing, "Damned bird, take this!" Clang! A sharp slicing sound rang through the place. Su Zimo had retrieved the cold moon saber on his waist and slashed upwards. Swash! A cold light shot through the air. Stunned, the crane no longer dared to attack Su Zimo as it flapped and ran away. It had not expected Su Zimo to make a move. More than that, it had not expected that Su Zimo would dare to make a move on it. Within Ethereal Sect, no one dared to bully it. Notwithstanding the 5 peak masters, even Ethereal Sect's master would dote on it. The job of pushing potential sect applicants into the 8 distresses formation was initially done by other cultivators of the sect. However, the crane volunteered to do it thinking that it was interesting. Indeed, it was rather fun at the start to see people being chased into the 8 distresses formation one by one. Yet, the crane no longer found it fun after encountering this bow and saber-carrying scholar. A feather glided by slowly. Even though the crane had managed to dodge the attack, the cold moon saber still sliced away one of its feathers. That sight caused the 2 peak masters watching above to freeze momentarily, almost striking out as they gripped their spirit weapons tightly. The gall of that lad to dare bully Lil Crane. He's definitely going to have a hard time in the future if he gets accepted into the sect. Both Wen Xian and Xian Yi looked at Su Zimo with a trace of pity. Right then, Su Zimo did not know what was going on. After that slash, he was overjoyed as he burst out laughing. Damned bird, you're still too weak. Go back and train for a couple more years. With a reverse throw, Su Zimo stabbed the cold moon saber into the wall of the peak and in one swift leap, jumped onto the blade with the tip of his toes. He then hopped up while conveniently pulling the cold moon saber out of the wall with his feet. The entire process was fluid as water without any pauses at all. In the blink of an eye, he had arrived at the top of the peak. Looking down at the crane that was still circling around in midair, Su Zimo waved and smiled. Goodbye. The crane was still in its infancy stage. In human years, it was nothing more than 8 years old, and that was when it was most playful. Even though it wasn't injured by that slash, it still felt upset about it. Looking at Su Zimo's actions, the crane blinked a few times as though it was about to tear up before flying towards Ethereal Peak while crying nonstop. Caw, 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 caw. The cries of the crane reverberated through Ethereal Peak, alarming many people. Didn't Lil Crane go to the front peak to bully them? Why does it look as though it was the one that was bullied? A brown-haired youth seated within a palace on Elixir Peak asked curiously. From a palace on Talisman Peak came a cold-looking middle-aged lady. Watching the crane fly through the air, she frowned slightly and muttered, "What's wrong with Lil Crane? To think that someone of Ethereal Sect would dare bully it?" A disheveled old man appeared on Weapon Peak as well. Slovenly dressed, he burst out in laughter. How dare to see Lil Crane being on the losing end. Interesting, interesting. Chapter 69, Shocking Slash. Chapter 69, Shocking Slash. Su Zimo turned around and saw 4 people. He had met the 2 children previously. Apart from them, there were 2 middle-aged cultivators with exceptional auras, looking at him weirdly. Su Zimo guessed that the 2 of them must be seniors of Ethereal Peak. Placing Little Fatty down, Su Zimo noticed that there were 8 gigantic flags around half as high as them being planted around each of them. The flags had mysterious patterns drawn on them as they flapped in the wind. What's that? Su Zimo frowned. Without thinking more about it, he stabilized his breathing and arranged his attire before greeting the 2 middle-aged cultivators. Greetings, seniors. I'm Su Zimo of Yin Country. I've managed to ascend the peak by luck. Activate. Before Su Zimo could even finish, he was interrupted by a loud holler. The 8 flags surrounding Su Zimo and Little Fatty illuminated brightly as the patterns shone with a bedazzling glow. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo felt an ominous sense of danger. The last thing he saw was one of the middle-aged cultivators sweeping his robes from a distance away as an unblockable energy blasted at them. The energy was tremendous and Su Zimo could not resist it at all. He was swept off the peak and fell over, watching the top of the peak turn smaller by the second. His body was not his to control at all as fear started growing within him. Bam! Su Zimo fell into the abyss and his entire body was crushed. Even though his physical body was clearly destroyed, Su Zimo was still entirely conscious. Endless waves of pain shot through him, biting at him tirelessly as his tendons tore and his flesh was shredded. What was happening? Su Zimo could not understand it all. In fact, he did not have the time to think about it as he was tormented by the endless pain. He had never understood the sort of pain that one would experience in the face of death. An intense fear existed between the edge of life and death. It was a fear that could cause one to break down. For humans, it was almost instinct for them to fear death. If they could even shit their pants by having a sword pointed at their throat, how terrifying would it be to be faced with death itself? At the top of the peak, Su Zimo and Little Fatty stood motionlessly with their eyes shut and bodies shivering. Neither of them had fallen into the abyss. The both of them were now within the illusion of the activated 8 Distresses formation. This 8 Distresses formation is even stronger than the one in the abyss since you're the one who created it personally. Would the two of them be able to endure it? When Xian asked worriedly. Xianyi replied, let's wait and see. As long as they can get through one tribulation, they'll be considered to have passed the test. Right then, 3 figures appeared on the top of the peak. The 3 of them had passed the test of the 8 Distresses formation from within the abyss. After crossing the life and death tribulations, they were teleported to the top of the peak. All 3 of them looked pale as a sheet, sweating from head to toe as they sat where they were feebly, looking lost and dazed. The 2 Dao children rushed up and fed all 3 of them an elixir each. Once they consumed it, the 3 people looked more relaxed as their faces started to fill with life once more. The 2 fellas with the variant spirit roots are not bad. They've already passed through 3 tribulations, Xianyi suddenly mentioned. When Xian sighed, of the 8 distresses, life, death, illness, and age are easier to get through. However, the later 4 tribulations are one tougher than the other. Even for myself who has already attained a core, I may not be able to get through all the tribulations. The moment he said that, one of the 8 flags swayed gently before shooting into the skies with a blinding light. Xianyi heaved out a sigh of relief and nodded. Not bad. The lad has already crossed the tribulation of death. A moment later, the haughty man and white-bloused woman were sent to the top of the peak. When Xian looked at the both of them and smiled, well done, you guys have passed through 4 tribulations. Take a rest at the side. Swoosh! Yet another huge flag swayed before bursting into the skies. That's fast. He's already endured through the distress of life? Xianyi was surprised. The distress of life was something that everyone had to go through but have forgotten. Within the womb, a fetus would be coiled into a ball with its arms and feet unable to stretch, and neither could it breathe. It was akin to being sealed in a tight cage, and the pain of it was excruciating. That was also the reason why babies would cry the moment they are born. Before long, another streak of light broke through the clouds. Right after, a 4th beam of light. This, when Xian and Xianyi exchanged glances, both could read the shock in the other's eyes. From Elixir Peak, a brown-haired youth soared into the skies and looked at the lights from afar, frowning to himself. That light's from a flag for the 8 Distresses formation. There's actually someone who could have Xianyi create the formation personally? With a slight pause, he muttered to himself, no, I've got to go check it out. At the same time, a shadow streaked out towards the front peak from Talisman and Weapon Peak respectively. Bam! A 5th beam of light appeared. Before long, a brown-haired youth, cold-faced middle-aged lady, and a disheveled old man appeared on the top of the peak as well. All 5 peak masters were gathered. Swoosh! A huge flag wavered. A 6th beam of light. He's already passed through 6 of the 8 distresses. What a mental fortitude. Where is this lad from? The brown-haired youth asked with a deep voice. He's from Yin country. I don't know anything other than that, when Xian shook his head. The cold-faced lady swept her gaze across Su Zimo's body and frowned, asking, Fire Spirit Root? That seemed to be the case. However, for some reason, the spirit testing gate refused to let him through. We can test him with a spirit stone again later, Wen Xin replied. Right after he replied, bam! The seventh beam of light shot through. Su Zimo had passed through the seventh tribulation. Little Fatty was already sprawled on the ground bawling in tears after enduring through the tribulations of life and death. He had yet to pull himself out of the pain received from the tribulations of the 8 distresses. During the time, the 2 Dao children explained to everyone present about the entirety of the life and death stage. From the initial 500-odd applicants, there were only 6 remaining on the peak who had passed the 3rd stage. Other than the haughty man, white-bloused woman, and Little Fatty, the remaining 3 were mortals without spirit chi. Everyone looked at Su Zimo with a complicated gaze. They had just gone through the tribulations of the 8 distresses personally and could still remember the excruciating pain they had gone through. None of them could imagine the sort of torment it would be to endure through 7 different distresses. Xianyi spoke with a grim tone. The 8th distress is of the 5 skandhas. That is akin to all of the previous 7 distresses combined and isn't something any human could endure. Let me dispel the formation lest the lad is hurt. He was just about to move when an 8th beam of light shone. It was extremely bedazzling on the peak and illuminated half the skies above them. At the same time, Su Zimo suddenly opened both eyes and with a burning killing intent, he reverse gripped his cold moon saber and slashed forward. It was a breathtaking slash. That single slash was even brighter than the 8th beam that had covered the entire peak. It was directed right at Xianyi with an intent so chilling that the air on the peak seemed to have frozen and gone stale. All 5 peak masters were stunned right away. After all, the slash happened way too suddenly. Xianyi's expression was unchanged. Extending his finger, a light exuded from the tip of it as he tapped gently at the cold moon saber. Clang! The cold moon saber was sent flying. Su Zimo's body jolted as he stumbled back a couple of steps and nearly slipped off the top of the peak. When he saw the abyss beneath the layer of clouds below him, Su Zimo slowly woke up and realized that everything he had experienced was merely an illusion. The gazes of the 5 peak masters looking at Su Zimo changed slowly. Chapter 70. Joining Ethereal Peak. Chapter 70. Joining Ethereal Peak. The thing that truly shocked the 5 peak masters was not the fact that Su Zimo had endured through the 8 distresses. It was that slash of his. As perfected golden cores, all 5 of them could sense the sort of energy the slash carried along. Its might had surpassed even the full strength of a perfected chi refinement warrior. For a mere mortal to surpass the strength of a perfected chi refinement warrior with just a burst of his physical body, what sort of a phenomenon was that? That was proof that this man's body was as tough as spirit beasts. In fact, he might even be able to match early-stage Foundation establishment spirit demons. Not just that, Su Zimo's slash carried a heavy killing intent. This man must have killed quite a number of times to display a slash as such. Yet, how could a mortal have killed so many times? Furthermore, their shock came from the fact that Su Zimo had dared to strike at Xianyi with such resolute decisiveness. One had to understand that Su Zimo was but a mere mortal. However, Xianyi was a perfected golden core, the peak master of Array Peak. To mere mortals, he was what they would define as immortals. Yet, Su Zimo's slash had the intention of murdering an immortal. Why did you strike at me? Xianyi's gaze was bright as he glared at Su Zimo and asked grimly. By now, Su Zimo had realized that he had fallen into an illusion and everything he had experienced was merely his hallucinations. Lowering his head, he replied, I mistook you as the one who had struck at me to push me off the peak. Hence, the attack. The 5 peak masters had expected that answer. However, that answer was also troubling at the same time. This was a man that couldn't be tamed, be it whether the other party was an immortal or had anyone strong backing him. As long as this man was offended, he would kill the other party. To them, Su Zimo was like a double-edged sword. Resolute and sharp, not only could he kill, he could injure them as well. It was hard to tell if it would be a fortune or disaster accepting someone like this into the sect. However, Su Zimo had an extremely rare mental fortitude, such that he was even able to endure through the tribulations of the 8 distresses. It would be difficult for Ethereal Peak to give up on such a rare talent. Furthermore, Su Zimo had already passed all 3 tests of the sect. Exchanging glances, all 5 Peak Masters could not arrive at a decision. Normally, Spirit Peak's master, Wen Xian, would definitely be the first to accept someone as such. Yet, he was keeping silent at the moment. Contemplating silently, Wen Xian retrieved a spirit testing stone from his storage bag and handed it to Su Zimo. "Test your spirit root again." Su Zimo gripped the spirit testing stone tightly. It shone scarlet red and emanated heat. All 5 Peak Masters nodded their heads in agreement. Fire element, Heaven's spirit root. That's right. Before that thought passed them, the spirit testing stone turned into ash and scattered from Su Zimo's fingertips. Everyone was stunned. What had just happened? The fat child pointed at Su Zimo agitatedly. "Peak Master, see? I didn't lie." Even though all 5 Peak Masters were perfected golden cores, they had never seen anyone who could turn a spirit testing stone into ash for a mere test. It was weird. Suddenly, an authoritative voice boomed out in all 5 of their minds. "This lad has too much killing intent and is too brash. Since he has a fire spirit root, we can let him join the weapon peak to learn more about the craft of refining weapons. We can make other plans for him after we shave away some of his aggressiveness." That voice was from Ethereal Peak's sect master. Other than the 5 Peak Masters, no one else knew what was going on. The Peak Master of Weapon Peak was the disheveled old man. He snickered at Su Zimo. "Come, follow me back to the Weapon Peak. From now on, you'll be a trial disciple of Ethereal Peak. You'll be under me." "Understood." Su Zimo nodded. The haughty man, white-bloused woman, and little fatty were inducted into Spirit Peak naturally, while the 3 remaining mortals were assigned to Elixir, Array, and Talisman Peak. Waving his oily robes, the disheveled old man collected Su Zimo and left the peak. Before long, Su Zimo was brought to the Weapon Peak as the disheveled old man remarked, "I'm your master from now on. We don't have so many rules here in Weapon Peak. You can just call me old man." "Shui. Yes, you. Come here." The disheveled old man beckoned to a disciple passing by nearby. The man named Shui was frail and skinny. Running over, he nodded his head to the disheveled old man and greeted courteously, "Master, Su Zimo here has just joined the sect, and he's your junior brother. Go get him one of our sect badges and items for trial disciples before choosing a cave abode." After giving his instructions, the disheveled old man waved his robes and left. "I'll be troubling you then, senior brother," Su Zimo greeted with cupped fists. Shui smiled and waved it off. "It's fine. Don't stand on courtesy." He brought Su Zimo before a majestic cockloft and introduced, "This is our Elixir Peak's spirit weapon chamber. If any of the trial disciples from the 5 peaks want a spirit weapon, they would have to come exchange for it using their contribution points. To exchange for spirit stones, elixirs, and cultivation manuals, one would have to use contribution points too." "How do you get contribution points?" Su Zimo asked. "There is a mission steal within the 5 peaks that will refresh with new missions every now and then. The greater the difficulty of the missions, the more contribution points they give." Shui brought Su Zimo to the spirit weapon chamber and greeted the elderly guard, "Senior, this is a new disciple of Weapon Peak, and he's here for a sect badge." "Oh, name?" The elderly guard opened his sleepy eyes and asked feebly. "Su Zimo." From his storage bag, the elderly guard retrieved a long jade badge where one side was etched with mysterious patterns and the other side was smooth and blank. With his sharp nails, the elderly guard shot out a stream of spirit chi and wrote down in cursive letters, "Su Zimo." Tossing the badge out, the elderly guard went back to sleep. Su Zimo took the badge over and examined it to find out that there was nothing extraordinary about it. Shui smiled. "Junior brother, don't look down on this sect badge. Holding it gives you freedom in and out of the sect, and even the mystifying fog barrier outside can't affect you. Su Zimo nodded his head and kept it carefully. Suddenly, Shui slapped his own head as though he recalled something. He then turned and smiled to the elderly guard. "Senior, are you forgetting about something?" Without even opening his eyes, the elderly guard tossed out a storage bag casually. Receiving it, Shui passed it to Su Zimo. "Junior brother, there's a manual for the spirit-peering art and qi condensation, along with 10 inferior-grade spirit stones. Do keep it well." Shui knew that Su Zimo had not mastered qi condensation yet, and hence opened the storage bag before placing one of the 2 manuals in the latter's hands. He summoned a flying sword and had Su Zimo hop on it. Arriving at the mid of the peak, he pointed to a row of cave abodes. Weapon Peak does not have much disciples, so many of our cave abodes are empty. Just pick whichever one you fancy, junior brother. Remembering that he had to cultivate his mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, Su Zimo chose a secluded one at the corner as his home in Ethereal Peak. Chapter 71. Frightening Cultivation Speed. Chapter 71. Frightening Cultivation Speed. The cave abode was extremely spacious, and after some quiet meditation, Su Zimo contained his excitement of joining the sect. Placing the sect badge around his waist like Shui, he took out the 2 manuals. Spirit-peering art was a fundamental skill in the cultivation world where almost every cultivator had to learn it. Through lining their eyes with spirit qi, one could determine the cultivation realm of other cultivators. But of course, there are rare cultivation techniques as well that could help one hide their cultivation realm from spirit-peering art's detection. The qi condensation manual could be considered as an entry skill for Ethereal sect. Everything from opening storage bags, cultivating the spirit-peering art, sword kinesis flight, refining elixirs and weapons required one to have spirit qi. Because Su Zimo had a fire spirit root, the spirit qi he could manifest from qi condensation would naturally carry the fire element. Before he left, Shui had informed Su Zimo that there would be a welcome ceremony held 10 days later at Ethereal Palace, which was situated at the main peak of Ethereal sect. Along with many seniors, the sect master would be present as well, and all the new disciples were required to attend it. Su Zimo was determined to reach level 1 qi condensation before the welcome ceremony. The very thought that he would be able to obtain sword kinesis flight once he achieved qi condensation had Su Zimo's blood boiling with excitement. He would no longer have to be in the wretched state of being chased by other cultivators. Opening the qi condensation manual slowly, Su Zimo was gradually immersed in the lines of tiny words. The first step of qi condensation was to obtain a sense of qi. Spirit qi was everywhere, and it was akin to breathing air. However, one would not be able to sense spirit qi without a spirit root. Following the instructions of the qi condensation manual, it took an hour before Su Zimo felt a warm sensation channeling in the air around him. It was a fresh, unique sensation unlike anything he had ever felt before. So, this is spirit qi. As his thoughts wavered, the sensation disappeared, and he could no longer sense that warm energy. A flicker shot through Su Zimo's eyes as he pondered about it before coming to a realization. There were 3 words written on the first page of the qi condensation manual: mindful qi condensation. Only if one was at peace and mindful would they be able to sense the existence of spirit qi. The moment they were distracted, the sensation would dissipate. But no matter what, Su Zimo was slightly relieved that he had managed to achieve the first step of sensing spirit qi. After all, there was something odd about the fire spirit root within him. Not only could it destroy spirit testing stones, it even caused the sect's spirit testing gate to explode. Previously, Su Zimo was still worried whether an implanted spirit root would achieve the same effects as an innate one. Now, it seemed as though those worries were unwarranted. The second step of qi condensation was to absorb the qi internally. It wasn't enough to just sense the spirit qi. One had to control and absorb it. The third step was to channel the qi to the dantian. After absorbing it into the body, one would have to control and channel it to the dantian. That was the only way to ensure that the spirit qi would be fully his instead of being dispersed through the body. With that, he would have achieved level 1 qi condensation. Casting aside all distractions, Su Zimo emptied his mind and felt at the warm aura around him before absorbing it into his body slowly. All of a sudden, Su Zimo felt a warm sensation appearing in his right hand as a stream of spirit qi entered it. Interesting. The qi condensation manual did not mention which part of the body will be used to absorb the spirit qi. However, it was a new experience for Su Zimo to have the spirit qi enter through his right hand. The stream of spirit qi that entered his body was rampant and wild. Frantically, Su Zimo worked to control and channel it to his dantian. The dantian was like the treasure trove of one's body. The moment the spirit qi was channeled in, everything became calm once more. Level 1 qi condensation. Su Zimo opened his eyes, which were filled with excitement and a hint of incredibility. Night had just descended, which meant to say that he had only spent less than 2 hours. The fact that he had managed to reach level 1 qi condensation within such a short time felt surreal to Su Zimo. Seems like that's the power of a heaven spirit root. Su Zimo smiled. Now that he had achieved qi condensation, he was in a good mood and decided to continue absorbing spirit qi, working towards level 2 without resting. His right hand was still the first to feel warm as the spirit qi gushed in endlessly, controlled and channeled by Su Zimo to his dantian. Su Zimo was immersed in his cultivation, and just like that, an entire night had passed. Level 2 qi condensation. Within a single night, Su Zimo had achieved level 2 qi condensation. Isn't this a little too soon? Is that how fast things move with a heaven spirit root? He was a little stunned. Su Zimo did not know the speed in which others cultivated at. However, he merely felt that it was unusual for him to cultivate that quickly. After all, he had not even made use of spirit stones and elixirs yet for the previous night. If he had used them, wouldn't his cultivation speed be even faster? He decided to cast aside all his queries first and to ask his other seniors when he had the chance. The thought of spirit stones gave Su Zimo an idea. Before he left Pingyang Town, he killed Zhou Dingyun and had managed to obtain a storage bag. Now that he was at level 2 qi condensation, he could finally use it. Taking out Zhou Dingyun's storage bag, a stream of spirit qi flowed out of Su Zimo's fingertips as he touched the storage bag gently. It opened up and a space floated out from within with more than 1,300 inferior-grade spirit stones lined together. Other than another jade bottle, there was nothing else. He opened the jade bottle. It contained 3 elixirs as a gentle fragrance wafted out. Su Zimo whiffed at the fragrance, and the calm spirit qi that was contained in his dantian began to rumble. He instantly understood that those 3 elixirs would benefit him in absorbing spirit qi. For someone like him who had just achieved qi condensation, this was quite a small fortune. Su Zimo kept the spirit stones, elixirs, sanguine crystal bow, cold moon saber, and the quiver on his back into the storage bag given to him by the sect. Right away, his entire body felt lighter with 1 ton worth of weight removed. The amazing thing about storage bags was that no matter the weight of the items kept in them, the user would not feel it at all. Opening the manual for the Spirit Peering Art began cultivating it. He spent the rest of his time cultivating the Qi Condensation Manual in the daytime and the Mystic Classic of the 12 Demon Kings of the Great Wilderness in the nighttime. Just like that, 10 days had passed. The welcome ceremony for the 7 new disciples of the sect had finally arrived. Su Zimo tidied his attire before leaping off his stone bed. Even though 10 days had passed, Su Zimo's Qi condensation was still at level 1 and had not increased. In reality, he was already at level 4 Qi condensation by the 7th day, and his dantian had amassed a large amount of spirit qi. However, Su Zimo recalled Daiyu's advice. Some of the truly talented cultivators would choose to use the spirit qi to refine their physical body while cultivating. For the next 3 days thereafter, he used all the spirit qi he had amassed to refine his body, leaving only a portion left in his dantian. Even though he made no progress for his marrow cleansing section, Su Zimo's body was now much stronger than it was 10 days ago. He estimated that by now, even a full forced attack by a level 10 perfected Qi refinement warrior using an inferior grade spirit weapon would not be able to pierce his skin. Chapter 72, Mystical Guardian Beast. Chapter 72, Mystical Guardian Beast. Junior Brother Su, I'm Shui. Are you around? Suddenly, a voice rang out from outside the cave abode. It was Senior Brother Shui, the person who had brought Su Zimo around initially. Su Zimo opened the door hurriedly. Now that they were meeting again, Su Zimo subconsciously activated his spirit-peering art and discovered that Shui was a Qi refinement warrior with level 9 Qi condensation. Shui looked at Su Zimo with shock and incredulity, asking, Junior Brother Su, you're already at level 1 Qi condensation? Su Zimo could not figure out what Shui meant by that and merely nodded his head, afraid that he might make a mistake by speaking. Wow, that's incredible. Shui could not help but gasp. Su Zimo froze for a moment. It was incredible for someone to reach level 1 Qi condensation in 10 days? If he had not used the spirit Qi to refine his body, he would already be at level 5 Qi condensation. Coughing gently, Su Zimo asked, Su Zimo, how long does it normally take for someone to reach level 1 Qi condensation? That would have to depend on their spirit root. For example, I have an earth spirit root, and it took me close to an entire month to reach level 1 Qi condensation. You have to understand that out of the 3 steps, sensing and absorbing spirit Qi is the most difficult for beginners to grasp. They either fail to sense the existence of spirit Qi, or they're unable to absorb it. All of that will require time to cultivate, test, grasp, and discover, Shui explained. Even though Su Zimo's expression was indifferent, he was even more curious in his heart now. Sensing and absorbing spirit Qi posed no challenge to him at all, unlike what Shui had explained. Could that be the benefit of having a heaven spirit root? The moment he thought of that, Su Zimo smiled. It might be because I've got a heaven spirit root, and that's why I cultivated faster. That must be it. Suddenly enlightened, Shui nodded his head. It's indeed much easier for those with a heaven spirit root to attain Qi condensation. I heard that some geniuses take a single day to reach level 1 Qi condensation. But don't feel bad, Junior Brother. It's already extremely fast for you to reach level 1 within 10 days. Su Zimo smiled and nodded. In reality, he had only taken less than 2 hours to reach level 1 Qi condensation. But according to Shui, even the fastest geniuses require a single day. How could this be? He then thought about the explosion of the spirit testing gate, the ashing of the spirit testing stone, his frightening cultivation speed, and all the other weird phenomenons. The only explanation was that the heaven spirit root given to him by Dai Yu was much stronger than real heaven spirit roots. I can't teach you anymore. Hence, I have planted a spirit root in you. The quality won't be any lesser than the heaven spirit root. Next, join a clan and cultivate for immortality. That was what Dai Yu said to him. It sounded casual and in fact even nonchalant. But it was only now that Su Zimo realized how horrifying the spirit root she had planted for him was. Suddenly, Shui frowned and asked oddly, wait, that's weird. Junior Brother, you've got a heaven spirit root. How come you're in our weapon peak instead of spirit peak? What's the difference? Su Zimo asked. A huge one. Laughing, Shui replied, it's almost time for the welcome ceremony. I'll take you there and explain along the way. Summoning a flying sword, Shui beckoned for Su Zimo to join him before they sped off to Ethereal Peak. Along the way, Su Zimo found out from Shui that even though each of the 5 peaks had their own specialties, Spirit Peak was the strongest with the most disciples, followed by Talisman Peak and Array Peak. The weakest ones were Elixir Peak and Weapon Peak. Spirit Peak's forte was in killing and battle skills. That was why, by logic, all those with heaven spirit roots would be sent to Spirit Peak. A strong mastery of fire is required for both refinement of elixirs and weapons. Yet, Ethereal Peak was not well versed in fire techniques. Out of the 5 sects, True Fire Sect was the most knowledgeable towards fire. In the Great Zhou dynasty, there would be a competition between the sects once every 10 years where all major and minor sects would participate. There would then be 4 ranking lists of spirit, weapon, elixir, and talisman for the top 10 of each. That was a mere 40 people out of hundreds of sects and thousands of their most talented cultivators. Anyone who could have their names listed on the rankings would not only receive immense prestige, there would be tremendous rewards as well, and it was proof that they were the true talents of the Great Zhou dynasty. Out of every sect competition, Ethereal sect would gain the most spots on the spirit ranking, followed by the talisman ranking. However, they've never managed to get any spots on both the weapon and elixir rankings. That was the reason why Shui could not understand how someone like Su Zimo, who possessed a heaven spirit root, was sent to weapon peak instead of spirit peak. Su Zimo could guess at the reasons why it was so. Firstly, he had destroyed the sect's spirit testing gate. Secondly, he struck out at Array Peak's master, Xian Yi. This arrangement might have been a punishment for him. However, Su Zimo was not bothered by it at all. From what Shui had said, all the Qi refinement warriors in Ethereal sect were all trial disciples, and none of them could enter Ethereal Peak, which was surrounded by all 5 peaks, freely. Only Foundation establishment cultivators were considered as inner sect disciples and would have a chance of obtaining middle-grade spirit weapons and better cultivation techniques. With Su Zimo's cultivation speed, it would take a mere couple of years for him to become an inner sect disciple. Before long, the both of them arrived at Ethereal Peak, where a majestic palace stood erected not too far away, barely visible through the clouds. There was a sign on top of the palace with the words Ethereal Palace etched in it. Shui brought Su Zimo towards Ethereal Palace. Along the way, a statue of a crane stood erect. It was gigantic at 100 feet tall, with its eyes shut and exuding an authoritative aura with golden and shimmering, lifelike feathers. Compared to the gigantic statue, Su Zimo and Shui were like tiny ants. Even though Su Zimo felt that the statue looked familiar, he did not think too much about it and merely commented in praise, "I wonder who created this statue. It's so lifelike that it's almost like a real crane." Shoo! Suddenly, Shui's expression changed as he shushed at Su Zimo right away. "What's wrong?" Su Zimo whispered uneasily. Wiping away his sweat, Shui replied, "That's not a statue. That's Ethereal sect's mystical guardian beast. It's alive." "Alive?" Su Zimo coughed gently and raised his head to look at it again awkwardly. Because the crane stood there motionlessly, Su Zimo's first thought was that it was a statue. "What's it perched here for then?" Su Zimo asked again. Shaking his head, Shui replied, "I've got no idea either. Senior Crane usually stays within the Ethereal Palace, and it's rare for normal disciples to catch a glimpse of it. I guess we're really lucky today." Pausing for a moment, Shui looked around with a mysterious expression, whispered gently, "Though, I heard that Senior Crane's child was bullied to tears by a new disciple recently. Perhaps it's here to settle things with that disciple. I wonder who's the unlucky one, hee." Su Zimo suddenly stopped in his tracks and turned around. Blinking his eyes slowly, he asked, "Say, is the child of this Senior Crane a crane too? Isn't that just nonsense?" "Obviously it is." Shui laughed. Su Zimo did not find it funny in the slightest bit. Chapter 73, Tianhuang Mainland. Chapter 73, Tianhuang Mainland. When Shui saw Su Zimo stopping in his tracks with a weird expression, he asked softly, "What's wrong, junior brother? Why do you look so pale?" Su Zimo did not reply. As though he had recalled something, Shui gasped and pointed at Su Zimo with a stutter. Why, you're not that, you unlucky soul, right?" Right then, Su Zimo felt a cold wind and goosebumps rising all over his body. It was as though he was being targeted by an incomparably strong being. Su Zimo's body froze and his hands and feet turned cold as he turned around and raised his head slowly. Unknowingly, the gigantic crane behind the both of them had its eyes opened, glaring at them with an icy gaze. Before the crane, Su Zimo felt that he was incomparably small, and that comparison wasn't merely for their size. It was in terms of power. If the crane wanted him dead, it did not even have to make a move. A single thought was more than enough. The air around them seemed to have gone stale as a killing intent spread slowly, making it seem as though the heavens could collapse at any moment. All of a sudden, the crane spread its wings and soared through the skies, passing by the both of them and headed towards Ethereal Palace. Its gigantic wings covered almost half of the skies as the wind howled with billowing sand. In the blink of an eye, the crane entered Ethereal Palace and disappeared from sight. Within that short moment of a few breaths, Shuiyi's face had turned pale as a sheet and he was covered in sweat. He could not help but turn to look at Su Zimo. Standing where he was, Su Zimo's expression was unchanged. Other than a slightly pale look on his face, his eyes held no fear. "Junior brother, aren't you afraid?" Shui could not help but ask. Su Zimo shook his head. "If Senior Crane wanted me dead, he would have struck long ago. Why wait till now, and even wait for me before Ethereal Palace?" "That's true," Shui breathed out heavily and nodded. Suddenly, Su Zimo asked, "What's the cultivation realm of Senior Crane?" "No idea. However, its child has an extraordinary bloodline and is a spirit demon that's equivalent to an early-stage foundation establishment. Imagine, it's just in its infancy stage and hasn't cultivated at all. How strong would it be when it grows up in the future?" Shui was clearly reminding Su Zimo to be careful in the future as well. Not long later, the haughty man, white-bloused woman, Little Fatty, and everyone else arrived at Ethereal Palace too. When Little Fatty caught sight of Su Zimo, his eyes shone brightly as he greeted and stumbled over. "Bro, amazing. You're already at level 1 chi condensation." Little Fatty snickered. The haughty man and white-bloused woman swept their gazes past Su Zimo indifferently. To them, there was nothing special about reaching level 1 chi condensation in 10 days. Su Zimo checked out the rest using the spirit peering art. Within 10 days, both the haughty man and white-bloused woman had already broken through to level 6 chi condensation while Little Fatty was still at level 5. The other 3 trial disciples had not managed to attain chi condensation yet. "Say, I don't know your name yet?" Since the welcome ceremony had not started yet, Su Zimo began to chat with the Little Fatty idly. That caused the Little Fatty to give off a rare look of embarrassment as he chuckled dryly. "My surname's Pang and my name's Z." Frozen for a long time, Su Zimo repressed his amusement and praised, "What a great name! How befitting one!" "Heh." Pointing at the haughty man, Little Fatty whispered, "That cocky fella's name is Feng Haoyu, and that ice-cold beauty is Long Ro. Bro, have you realized something?" "What?" "That guy's surname is Feng, and so he has a wind spirit root. The ice-cold beauty's surname is Long, and so she has an ice spirit root. I've decided. I'll definitely not have my son's surname be Pang. He'll be called Lei, Guang, and One or whatnot. That way, he'll definitely have a variant spirit root. Man, the thought of it is awesome." Su Zimo. As they conversed, many cultivators gathered before Ethereal Palace. Most of them were Foundation Establishment cultivators, Ethereal Peak's inner sect disciples. There were also some cultivators that had flown over. They were clearly perfected golden cores. The 5 peak masters were present as well, standing before Ethereal Palace with an emptied space in the middle for them. Before long, a bell rang out from within Ethereal Palace and reverberated through the 5 peaks and into the valleys. Accompanying the ring, an elderly figure in his 50s clad in golden robes came forth slowly from Ethereal Palace. Standing before the entrance, he swept his gaze across Su Zimo and the other disciples. For some reason, Su Zimo sensed that the golden-robed elder's gaze seemed to have lingered slightly longer on him. "I'm Ethereal Peak's master, Ling Yun." Ethereal Peak is one of the 5 major sects within the Great Zhou dynasty. However, all of you have to understand that the land we're on is part of Tianhuang Mainland, which consists of 4 regions, 3 oceans, and 1 continent. Even the Great Zhou dynasty is merely one of the dynasties in the northern region of Tianhuang Mainland, and there are 3 other dynasties with similar strength to it. Su Zimo's mouth gaped apart slightly in shock. The Great Zhou dynasty was enough for him to look up to back in Pingyang town. It was at this moment that Su Zimo realized how insignificant the Great Zhou dynasty and even Ethereal sect was compared to Tianhuang Mainland. If he had continued staying within Pingyang town, he would be like a frog in a well, merely only able to see a pitiable portion of the skies. But of course, given Su Zimo's current strength, notwithstanding the 4 regions, 3 oceans, and 1 continent, it wasn't even enough for him to move about unhindered within the Great Zhou dynasty. After taking note of the shock within the eyes of Su Zimo and the rest, Sect Master Ling Yuan nodded his head and continued, "Of the 7 of you, some have already managed to reach level 6 Qi condensation, while some have yet to break through to level 1. Those who are slower need not feel discouraged. The path of cultivation is long and arduous. All of you are just at the beginning of things. Being slow at the start does not mean that you'll always be slow. Foundation establishment comes after Qi condensation. From there on, you will start on a major milestone of cultivation, core formation. Once you've formed a core, your lifespan would extend to 500 years as you cast away your mortal self and be known as a perfected being. After that, you will reach the nascent soul realm and your lifespan will further expand to 1,000 years as you become known as a perfected lord. There, your sea of wisdom is unlocked as you cultivate your spirit consciousness. Even if you are blinded, you will be able to sense everything around you as your spirit consciousness permeates through the world unobstructed. Post-nascent soul comes void reversion realm where you commit your heart to the Tao and refine your spirit to the void, casting away all impurities from the nascent soul. It will then evolve to an essence spirit, transparent and fearless of the world. That is when you have truly broken free of the shackles of a physical body. Other than being able to travel with merely your consciousness, it is also equivalent to having another life as it can assimilate and cultivate a body other than your physical self. Your lifespan will be 5,000 years at that stage, and at Void Reversion Realm, you will be known as a Tao being. Su Zimo was shocked to hear this. There were 9 sections to the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. The 7th section was about core formation, the 8th was about turning into an Yin spirit, and the 9th, Yang spirit. The Yin spirit section mentioned that one would be able to perceive their own spirit after breaking through the void. Was the Sea of Wisdom that Ling Yun mentioned referring to that void? Did that mean that the so-called Yin spirit was the immortal equivalent of nascent soul? The Yang spirit section mentioned that one would be able to obtain a pure Yang spirit uncontaminated from Yin after refining the impurities of the Yin spirit. At later stages, one would be able to assimilate with the heaven and earth powers and gather their energy. Did that mean that the so-called Yang spirit was the immortality equivalent of essence spirit? Lowering his head, Su Zimo tried his best to contain the shock in his eyes. If he were to cultivate both as a demon and a mortal, there was a high chance he would be able to obtain 2 golden cores in the future, 2 essence spirits. Chapter 74, Level 3 Spirit Fire. Chapter 74, Level 3 Spirit Fire. There are even higher realms above void reversion where one would be able to form rain and clouds with every flip of their hands. Any thought could cause rivers to reverse, bring about enough heat to burn the oceans and shift stars from their rotations. Every single step of theirs would cross thousands of meters. Those words rattled Su Zimo and the other disciples. It was as though they were already envisioning themselves ruling over the desolates while looking down at the world with disdain. Who would not look forward to power as such? Even though many of the inner sect disciples had heard those descriptions many times, it still sent ardor and zeal coursing through their blood. Sect Master Ling Yun continued with a deep voice. Head back and work hard on your cultivation. Every end of the year, our sect will organize a face-off between the 5 peaks and the rewards will be generous. Even though the 7 of you have just joined the sect, be it in terms of spirit root or potential, you are exceptional. I hope that there can be some amongst you that will obtain good results in our 5 peaks face-off. On the way back to Weapon Peak, Su Zimo asked Shui, "What's with this 5 peaks face-off?" Shui chuckled. Simply put, It's to choose the best out of the 5 peaks. For example, for the weapon peak face-off, the disciples of weapon peak would have a competition with their skills of refining weapons. The disciple that comes out top will get to choose an inferior grade spirit weapon of his desire from the spirit weapon chamber. As for elixir peak, they would compete in refining elixirs. The first disciple would be able to get a grade 1 elixir such as the spirit gathering pill. Frowning, Su Zimo asked, what if there are multiple disciples who can craft an inferior grade spirit weapon? How would they differentiate between the best then? Haha. Shui burst out laughing. If any disciple could craft an inferior grade spirit weapon, they would definitely be the best of weapon peak. Junior brother, you've yet to experience any weapon refinement techniques yet, and so you do not know how difficult it is to craft an inferior grade spirit weapon. There has never been any disciples who could craft an inferior grade spirit weapon during the annual weapon peak face-off. Everyone could only manage to create pseudo-spirit weapons, and our master will then judge who has the best quality. Su Zimo nodded. Shui continued, actually, for the 5 peaks face-off, all the other peaks are merely there for show. Everyone's actually more focused on spirit peaks face-off. After all, the disciples would be competing in terms of battling techniques and pure strength. That's way more exciting. The rewards are even better as well. Not only do they get an inferior grade spirit weapon, a grade 1 elixir, there would also be a grade 1 talisman as well as a number of spirit stones. Junior brother, don't fixate yourself on it. After all, both refining of elixirs and weapons would require a large amount of energy and time. Rather than dreaming of other things, the most important task on hand is to steady yourself and focus on your cultivation. Even though Su Zimo did not rebut Shui, he did not agree with it in his heart. As an elixir refinement master, one could create elixirs which would be helpful for boosting their cultivations. As a weapon refinement master, one could create weapons, and that was a clear benefit for raising one's strength as well. Most importantly, Su Zimo possessed a fire spirit root, and that would enhance his cultivation speed, saving time. Within the 5 peaks, there would be inner sect disciples arriving daily to help the disciples with their queries and doubts. Upon returning to Weapon Peak, Su Zimo listened carefully to an inner sect disciple's explanation of the techniques of refining weapons before returning to his cave abode. The fundamental of refining weapons was to first be able to cultivate a spirit fire. Spirit fire was created by igniting spirit chi into flames. There were 3 levels to spirit fires with their difference shown through their colors: faint red, dark red, and scarlet. The deeper the shade, the higher the temperature of the flame, and the more the impurities that could be purged. Above spirit fires came true fires which were faint, dark, and pure gold in color. The first step of creating weapons was material selection. Be it for refinement of elixirs or weapons, the materials used were spirit items of the universe that contained spirit chi within them. The second step was the smelting process. For elixirs, special elixir furnaces were required, while for weapons, it was weapon tripods. Be it elixir furnaces or weapon tripods, they were all created using special materials that could endure through heat and not melt. By placing the spirit materials they chose into the weapon tripod and using a spirit fire to smelt it, the materials would be melted into liquid form with initial impurities preliminary purged so that it is suitable for refinement. Third step, forging. This step would require controlling the temperature to dip while forging out the shape one wanted for the spirit weapon before the liquid solidified. Of course, one would require much more effort at this step if they wanted to create something special. However, if it was just a normal flying sword, things would be much simpler. Fourth step, tempering. By increasing the temperature within the weapon tripod once more, one would then use spirit chi and the flames to strike at the weapon, conducting a secondary round of impurities elimination to ensure that the spirit weapon turns sturdier. 5th step, spirit gathering. Spirit gathering was the crux and most difficult step of the entire weapon refinement process. Within the weapon tripod, a large amount of spirit chi would be released by the melted materials, and they would turn extremely pure under the repeated scorching of the spirit fire. By gathering the spirit chi and fusing it into the spirit weapon, lines of spirit patterns would form on it. And that was exactly the history of spirit weapon grades as well. If a single spirit pattern was created, it would be an inferior grade spirit weapon. If 4 spirit patterns could be created, it would be a supreme grade spirit weapon. The reason why this spirit gathering stage was difficult was because if it failed, the spirit weapon would explode within the tripod, causing all their previous efforts to go to waste. At the same time, there was a high rate of failure for spirit gathering. The more the patterns being tempered, the higher the rate of failure. 6th step, quenching. This was a simple step. Simply placing the highly heated spirit weapon into cold water would finish the forging process. Extending his left hand, Su Zimo activated the stream of spirit chi from his dantian as a weak flame formed in the middle of his palm. It was a faint red color and emanated a scorching heat. However, his palm did not feel the heat at all. Level 1 Spirit Fire. Su Zimo let out a smile. As the spirit chi dispersed, the spirit fire disappeared as well. But once he channeled spirit chi, a flame appeared in his palm once more. With that, Su Zimo continued practicing merrily. Suddenly, he recalled something. Back in Pingyang town, perfected Song Lang had shot out a scarlet flame from his fingertips, burning Zhui Feng to nothingness. Now, Su Zimo finally realized that flame was a level 3 spirit fire. The thought of Zhui Feng's death caused Su Zimo's eyes to dim as his mood was damped. On his immortality cultivation, he had just obtained level 1 Qi condensation. On his demonic cultivation, he was stuck on the progress of the marrow cleansing section even after such a long time. He wondered how long more he would have to wait to take revenge for Zhui Feng. Daiyu had mentioned that the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness would get more difficult towards the end, and without her around, Su Zimo would not be able to complete it. And now, he was already stuck after the bones strengthening at the marrow cleansing section. What about organs refinement and orifice clearing later on? As he fell deep into thought, Su Zimo's right palm gathered a ball of spirit fire subconsciously. Swoosh! A ball of flames rose and the scarlet color was rather striking. Shocked, Su Zimo swung his hand, and the spirit chi dispersed along with the spirit fire. That flame earlier on did not seem like it was faint red. Frowning, Su Zimo glared at his right palm before channeling spirit chi to create the spirit fire once more. Swoosh! Flames started rising. A bright light shone across Su Zimo's shocked face. Scarlet. Level 3 Spirit Fire. Chapter 75. Indeed quite incredible. Chapter 75. Indeed quite incredible. How could this be? Glaring at the scarlet flame in his right palm, Su Zimo wondered. Naturally, he would not assume that he had managed to create a level 3 spirit fire right after learning about it through pure talent. But what was the reason for everything before him? Opening his left palm, he channeled spirit chi and gathered a flame in that palm too. Swoosh! A faint red flame appeared. Level 1 Spirit Fire. Both balls of flames continued burning in Su Zimo's palms with strikingly different color and a distinct difference in temperature too. Dissipating the flames, he tried again a couple more times. Each time, his left palm would always form a level 1 spirit fire, while his right palm could reach level 3. Su Zimo thought back to a detail of qi condensation. The second step of qi condensation was to absorb the qi internally. Back then, the spirit qi in the air entered his body from his right hand. What did that imply? Frowning, he looked at his right hand for a long time but could not find anything unusual about it. Even after a long time, Su Zimo could not figure out what was going on and decided to let the doubt go for now. No matter what, it wasn't a bad thing for him to have a level 3 spirit fire right as he was starting to learn about weapon refinement. The higher the level of spirit fire, the more efficient the purging of impurities from the materials would be. Normally, a level 3 spirit weapon could even refine a middle-grade spirit weapon. But of course, the level of spirit fire was only one of the core factors for a weapon refinement master. They had to be able to control the spirit fire, temperature, and the most important process of spirit gathering. If any of the 6 steps were to go wrong, they would not be able to create any spirit weapons. For weapon refinement masters, they were divided to elementary, intermediate, and advanced depending on the grade of spirit weapons they can refine. Only those that can create superior-grade spirit weapons could be termed as advanced weapon refinement masters. For most perfected golden cores, the spirit weapons they use would not be higher than superior grade. Therefore, in the cultivation world, if anyone could become an advanced weapon refinement master, their status would be equivalent to that of a perfected golden core. In fact, in terms of reputation and networking, they would even surpass the average perfected golden core. However, even advanced weapon refinement masters would not dare to casually attempt for supreme-grade spirit weapons given the high failure rate. As a disciple of Weapon Peak, Su Zimo obtained a weapon tripod from the elderly guard and spent the rest of his time training on his weapon refinement skills in his cave abode. Occasionally, he would train his chi condensation and spend the nights reading into the marrow cleansing section. A month later, Su Zimo's cultivation realm was at level 5 chi condensation, and he was getting better at weapon refinement, having created a couple of pseudo-spirit flying swords successfully. However, he still had no progress on the marrow cleansing section. To be accurate, he did not even know how to carry on with it. The marrow cleansing section stated that he would be able to achieve marrow cleansing by quivering the marrow with the sounds of tigers and leopards. Having stayed an entire year in the Zhonglang mountain range, he was extremely familiar with the sounds of tigers and leopards. Yet, no matter how hard he tried to imitate it, he could not achieve the desired effect of marrow cleansing. Su Zimo was even almost going hoarse by the end of the month. He could feel that he was not going in the right direction, so he intended to look for an opportunity to capture a tiger and a leopard so that he could slowly work with that sound requirement. This day, Su Zimo came forth from his cave abode. Every end of the month, the 5 peaks would have a simple test held. It was not compulsory, and any disciples of the various peaks could take part. The first place of the test would have a chance to observe the projections of seniors in the sect refining weapons. One had to understand that every weapon refinement master had a different method of doing things. It was particularly so for the step of tempering in the weapon tripod, which was extremely secretive and not shown to most people. Through the entire month, Su Zimo had quite a number of doubts gathered. If he could take a look at those projections, it would be of great help to him. Before long, Su Zimo arrived at the Weapon Peak's Weapon Refinement Hall on a flying sword. He took a quick glance, and there were more than 100 people present. Weapon Peak's trial disciples added up to a few dozens of people. Where did the rest come from? You're here, junior brother Su. Right then, Shueti walked over from the side and greeted Su Zimo merrily. Not bad. You're already at level 5 chi condensation. Shuei exclaimed before asking, why? Are you here for the month-end test too? Yeah, I want to give it a shot. Su Zimo nodded his head. Sure, that's good. You can also learn by looking at the way others go about it. Shuei thought that Su Zimo was merely there to join the crowd since the latter had just gotten started on refining weapons. Senior brother, we've only got a couple dozens of disciples in Weapon Peak. Why are there so many people? Su Zimo asked. Shuei smiled. Within the sect, any of the disciples from the other 4 peaks who have an interest towards weapon refinement can come to Weapon Peak to learn and take part in the month-end test as well. In fact, even in the year-end face-off if they want to. After all, for some of the geniuses, they will want to learn about weapons, elixirs, talismans, and array formations even as they cultivate themselves. Su Zimo nodded his head. That was the same as what he thought. Su Zimo swept his gaze casually across the crowd before fixating it on a man clad in purple robes. The purple-robed man looked haughty with his head slightly reared and eyes closed. It was easy to spot him from the crowd. That man was Feng Haoyu, the person with a variant wind spirit root who had joined the sect at the same time as Su Zimo. After a month, Feng Haoyu had already gone from level 6 to level 7 chi condensation. Shuei followed Su Zimo's gaze and said, I heard that man is called the most talented genius our sect has obtained in 1,000 years. With his innate variant spirit root and an exceptional talent, many of the seniors think extremely highly of him. I've even heard that he's going to take part in the year-end face-off and boasted that he was definitely going to be the top of 3 peaks. Top of 3 peaks? Su Zimo frowned. Shui explained, even though he's a new disciple, he has a wind spirit root, and by the end of the year, he would definitely be a level 9 or 10 Qi refinement warrior. The only person that can compete with him in Spirit Peak is a woman called Long Ro. I heard that she's also a new disciple. Even if he gets to be the top of Spirit Peak, what about the other 2? Su Zimo asked. Shui lamented, Elixir and Weapon Peak. Our 2 peaks are the weakest in the sect. Even though it's good for the sect that we have a Feng Haoyu, it's still going to feel bad for us as disciples of Weapon Peak if he turns out top for our peak. Su Zimo was confused. Feng Haoyu has a wind spirit root. In terms of fire mastery, can he compete with Weapon Peak disciples with fire spirit roots? Junior brother, you know that anyone can create spirit fire regardless of their spirit root attributes? Shui asked in reverse. Su Zimo nodded. Anyone could create a spirit fire without a fire spirit root. It was just that in terms of sensing, cultivation, and mastery of it, those with a fire spirit root would be more astute to it. Shui continued, fire blossoms with the presence of wind. That is Feng Haoyu's advantage. Suddenly, Su Zimo realized. Under the influence of wind, fire burns ever brighter. Shui whispered, I heard that Feng Haoyu's already able to create a level 2 spirit fire. Stunned for a moment, Su Zimo looked at his right hand and nodded. That's indeed quite incredible. Chapter 76, Test Commencement. Chapter 76, Test Commencement. Quite incredible? That's extremely incredible. Shui lamented softly. I've already been in Ethereal sect for 6 years now, and I'm only edging at the border of level 2 spirit fire. Heh, let's not talk about these anymore. Picking himself up, Shui shrugged his shoulders. But if Feng Haoyu really does become accomplished in both refining elixirs and weapons, and end up making a name for himself in those rankings during the sect competition, that would be quite the honor for our sect too, isn't it? Smiling, Su Zimo nodded. Everyone, please be silent. Right then, a Foundation Establishment cultivator appeared at the front of the Weapon Refinement Hall and pushed his hands down, causing the chatter in the hall to die down. Everyone, please head forth and select your materials before finding an empty spot within the hall on your own to refine your weapons. The test commences now. All of the disciples began dispersing after choosing their materials as Su Zimo and Shui waited before choosing a spot at the back of the hall. With his hands behind his back, Feng Haoyu stood right in front with a haughty expression. No one dared to stand shoulder to shoulder against him. Before this, Feng Haoyu had already asked around and found out that none of the trial disciples within the 5 peaks had managed to create a level 2 spirit fire. The best amongst them was nearly bordering on the edge of level 2. Thus, Feng Haoyu was extremely confident that he would definitely be able to top this month-end test and obtain the rights to view projections of the weapon refinement process left behind by seniors of the sect. Bam! Retrieving a weapon tripod from his storage bag, Feng Haoyu slammed it heavily on the ground and the entire hall rattled. Every single one of his actions attracted everyone's attention. None of the 100-odd disciples attending the test were in any hurry as they all looked at Feng Haoyu after placing down their weapon tripod. Feng Haoyu's lips curled. Even though he did not turn around, he could feel the searing gazes that contained jealousy and envy. That was the type of feeling he enjoyed. The adoration of the masses. Extending his palm out slowly, Feng Haoyu channeled spirit qi. A ball of flames rose. It was merely a faint red color, level 1 spirit fire. The entire hall went silent as everyone watched the man right at the front with bated breaths. Swoosh! Feng Haoyu extended his other palm as a stream of spirit qi shot out from his fingertips, entering the initial ball of flames. With a loud rumble, the flame burned brightly as its color deepened. Before long, it was a dark red color. Level 2 spirit fire. The crowd went into an uproar. Even though many disciples of the sect had heard about it, they were still shocked seeing a level 2 spirit fire personally. A level 2 spirit weapon would improve the success rate of creating inferior-grade spirit weapons greatly, and was something that many cultivators would not be able to achieve in their lifetimes. Sensing emotions running high in the crowd, a look of glee flickered through Feng Haoyu's eyes as he pushed the ball of level 2 spirit fire into his weapon tripod where it continued to burn. He was warming his tripod. First, the area around the weapon tripod had to be warmed evenly using spirit fire, and after the temperature was balanced, the materials would be inserted. Because weapon refinement was a long process, many of the cultivators behind Feng Haoyu began to gather their own spirit fires and work on the tripod warming phase as well. Shui looked at Su Zimo. "Let's start too, junior brother Su." "Okay," Su Zimo nodded. Shui extended his palm as a ball of flames rose. Even though it was a level 1 spirit fire, its color was darker and showed vague signs of evolving to a level 2 spirit fire. One did not have to concentrate too much on the tripod warming process. Shui circled his spirit fire around the weapon tripod before letting it burn at the bottom and turning his head over to Su Zimo. He thought that he may be able to provide some advice given that this junior brother of his had just started on the craft of weapon refinement and might not be used to it. However, that move of Shui rooted him where he stood. There was a ball of fervent flames burning on Su Zimo's palm, and the color of it was somewhat piercing. Shui was completely stumped as his mind went blank. He did not even notice that the flames beneath his weapon tripod had extinguished. Su Zimo was learning from others around him as well by surrounding his spirit fire around the weapon tripod before letting it burn at the bottom. The process of warming the tripod was something that was not mentioned when the inner sect disciples explained things previously. Through the entire month, Su Zimo had not practiced warming the tripod in his seclusion. "Seems like this test wasn't a wasted trip. I got something out of it." Su Zimo was delighted internally. "Junior brother Su, why your spirit fire?" Right then, Shui Yi's stammering voice sounded out in Su Zimo's ears. Turning around, Su Zimo smiled. "I got lucky and somehow managed to cultivate out a level 3 spirit fire by accident." He was not saying it out of humility. It was cultivated through accident, and he did not know the reason for it till this day. Shui Yi's eyes were widened as his jaws nearly dropped to the ground. This was the first time that he had heard someone say they created a level 3 spirit fire out of sheer luck by accident. Even though their voices weren't loud, the surrounding disciples heard everything loud and clear. Level 3 spirit fire? Dream on. Some of the disciples in front turned around and were stumped as well. An odd tension began to spread and permeate through the hall. Standing right at the front, Feng Haoyu seemed to have felt something as he frowned. However, he did not turn around out of arrogance. Within the hall, there was no one worth his attention to turn around. Suddenly, an ear-piercing shriek broke the odd tension in the hall. Level 3 spirit fire. After that shriek, the entire hall went bonkers. Scarlet. It's truly a level 3 spirit fire. Who is this person? He doesn't look familiar. How have we not seen him before? I think he's one of the new disciples who joined this year. This is way too incredible. This man is only a level 5 Qi refinement warrior, and yet he's able to cultivate a level 3 spirit fire? What sort of talent is that? When he heard the discussion going on behind him, Feng Haoyu's expression turned grim. Standing silently, he composed himself and turned around slowly, looking back indifferently. The scarlet flame was the first thing that entered his line of sight. Right after, a face with sharp features and green robes that he had seen before. Him again. Feng Haoyu narrowed his eyes coldly. MMM? Sensing enmity, Su Zimo, who was initially still warming his tripod, looked over instinctively. What keen senses, Feng Haoyu remarked internally. He had already kept his enmity well hidden, but he had not expected that Su Zimo would notice it still. Their gazes met for a brief moment as Feng Haoyu turned back indifferently, haughty as ever. On the surface, it seemed as though Feng Haoyu did not take it to heart. However, The level 2 spirit fire beneath his weapon tripod had already been extinguished. That was a clear sign of his shock. Suzimo smiled and thought nothing more of it. Noticing that his weapon tripod was already warm, he was about to insert his materials when a head suddenly popped out beside him. He was so shocked that he pulled his cold moon saber out of his storage bag and almost slashed forth. "Greetings, Master." "Greetings, Peak Master." When the disciples in the hall saw who it was, all of them greeted. Suzimo coughed gently, keeping his cold moon saber without a trace. Chapter 77. Found a Treasure. Chapter 77. Found a Treasure. Unknowingly, the disheveled old Peak Master of Weapon Peak had made his way to the Weapon Refinement Hall and appeared beside Suzimo. The disheveled old man eyed the cold moon saber that Suzimo kept and asked casually, "Lad, why are you always trying to stab others over every single disagreement?" When he was joining the sect at the top of the front peak, Suzimo slashed out at Array Peak's master right after he came forth from the illusion. Now, he nearly did the same to Weapon Peak's master. With an awkward expression, Suzimo was ready to disperse his spirit fire and apologize to his master. However, the disheveled old man merely waved it off and shook his head. "It's fine. Continue with what you were doing. I'll just be watching from the side. No pressure." "All right," Suzimo nodded his head. Pausing for a moment, the disheveled old man patted Suzimo on the shoulders and commented sincerely, "Lad, you don't have to be strung up all day all night in Ethereal sect. Relax, no one is going to hurt you. Don't brandish your saber for every small reason." In reality, Suzimo's reaction was trained during his time in Songlang mountain range and had already become a habit. Outside the mountain range, every single beast was an enemy to Suzimo. Even back in his cave, he had to be alert against the spirit monkey's mischievous attacks. That was why he was so neurotic. However, it did not mean that Suzimo would let his guard loose just because of what the disheveled old man said. He would merely pay more attention so that he would not brandish his saber casually. The disheveled old man continued, "Besides, even if you want to brandish it, you've got to see your opponent first. 1 month into the sect, and you've already pointed your saber at 2 peak masters. What's going to happen the longer you stay?" Cough, cough. "I'll take note of it," Suzimo chuckled embarrassedly. Usually, none of the peak masters would appear for a month-end test as such, especially not the peak master of Weapon Peak who was known to be lazy by nature. Yet, everyone present was clear why the disheveled old man was appearing now. It was definitely not for Feng Haoyu, but Suzimo. Right then, Feng Haoyu, who was standing right at the front, had a burning sensation on his face. However, because he was back facing everyone else, no one could tell of the coldness in his eyes. Composing his emotions, Feng Haoyu began to warm the tripod once more. At the back of the hall, Suzimo had already begun to insert the materials since his level 3 spirit fire was not extinguished. With all the materials inserted, he channeled a large amount of spirit chi and flames burnt furiously, enveloping the entire weapon tripod. The temperature in the tripod continued to climb. The process of smelting was to turn all the materials to liquid state using a high temperature before fusing them together once more, removing as much impurities from them as possible. It was a step that had nothing to do with weapon refinement technique and was a clear indicator of the difference between different levels of spirit fire. Even if it was an advanced weapon refinement master wielding a level 2 spirit fire, he would not be able to match an amateur with a level 3 spirit fire during the smelting process. Before long, the materials in the tripod had begun to melt before turning into a metal liquid that emanated spirit chi. The level 3 spirit fire continued burning. The golden liquid burnt within the tripod, bubbling endlessly as the spirit chi inside thickened. At that, the disheveled old man's eyes flickered with a hint of satisfaction as he nodded. The metal liquid glowed bright red as the quantity was condensed through the repeated scorching. That was due to impurities being purged away. 15 minutes later, the metal liquid was no longer condensing. That did not imply that it was free of impurities. It was merely the smelting limits of a level 3 spirit fire. The smelting process was over. Right then, the materials of the other disciples had merely only started to melt. Of them, Feng Haoyu's speed was faster as a metal liquid was formed within his tripod. Not only was the level 3 spirit fire better in purging impurities, it was faster as well as Su Zimo led the pack far ahead. The next step, forging. Su Zimo dispersed his spirit fire and waited for the temperature within the tripod to dip. At the same time, he cultivated and rested at the side, replenishing the spirit qi he had expended. Forging required channeling of spirit qi to create a pair of spirit hands which would be inserted into the weapon tripod. One would then have to forge the shape of the spirit weapon they wanted before the metal liquid solidified. If one entered too early when the temperature was too high, notwithstanding the fact that the spirit hands may disperse easily, it would be difficult to forge the weapon since the metal liquid would not be completely cooled. However, if it was too late and the metal liquid was completely solidified, one would not be able to forge as well. This step was a test of experience. After 5 minutes, Su Zimo suddenly bolted up and channeled his spirit qi fervently. A pair of hands appeared in midair that reached into the weapon tripod, grabbing hold of the metal liquid. That was the perfect moment when the metal liquid was malleable without solidifying just yet. At the side, the disheveled old man was getting more pleased as he watched the focused Su Zimo. Bloody hell, I've really found a treasure this time round. If not for the fact that so many disciples were present, the disheveled old man could not wish for more than to hug Su Zimo tightly for a kiss right then. For some reason, Su Zimo felt a gust of cold wind behind his ass and could not help but broke into a shudder. Before long, a flying sword slowly took shape. The blade was long without any edge yet. This was merely a rough shape. By now, many of the disciples had given up on the test and were watching Su Zimo's weapon refinement process instead. When they noticed the shape of the sword being crafted, a shushing sound spread out from the crowd. Feng Haoyu was done with his smelting at the moment and was waiting for the temperature in the weapon tripod to dip. As he sat where he was to rest, he could not help but turn around to check out the commotion. The moment he saw the shape of the sword in Su Zimo's weapon tripod, he scoffed with a look of mockery and turned back. After the forging was complete, Su Zimo could naturally sense the strange tension around him. "Master, have I made a mistake?" he could not help but ask. The disheveled old man waved it off and replied nonchalantly, "It's not really a huge mistake. You've grasped the forging timing really finely. It's just that you've added an additional hilt to your sword." "An additional hilt?" Su Zimo froze for a moment, confused. The disheveled old man asked, "Do you know why most of the flying swords cultivators use do not have a hilt?" Su Zimo shook his head. A flying sword is the most common Dharma treasure for swords in the cultivation world. Its advantage is that it's fast, agile, versatile, and both ends are bladed. Unlike a normal sword, a flying sword does not have a hilt because the presence of it leads to greater air resistance and, in turn, a lower speed and agility. Suddenly, Su Zimo's eyes lit up. In the past, he did demonic cultivation and was always engaging in melee combat with others. Now, he was less than a month into immortality cultivation and did not have much practice with swords yet. At the end of the day, immortal and demonic cultivation were different. Cultivators do not go against others by wielding flying swords with their hands. Instead, they channeled their spirit qi into a stream of energy so as to control flying swords from afar. During a fight, if a flying sword that struck the enemy has a hilt, the sword would not pass through their bodies. Without a hilt, the flying sword would pierce their bodies with ease, allowing the cultivators to continue controlling it without being affected. If the opponent had a body tempering technique which gave them an extremely robust physical body, a flying sword with a hilt may end up in their hands instead. Without a hilt, the sword would be edged at every point, and the opponent would not be able to catch it barehanded. For a flying sword, a hilt was nothing more than a burden. Chapter 78. I Don't Care. Chapter 78. I don't care. The disheveled old man consoled him. It's just a small mistake. Just be more careful in the future. Don't be discouraged. Su Zimo nodded. No matter the end result, his trip today was not wasted. Even though forging looked to be a simple step, there were many factors to consider when shaping a spirit weapon so as to unleash its full potential. Fourth step, tempering. The forged flying sword hovered within the weapon tripod as Su Zimo reignited a new ball of level 3 spirit fire to heat it up. Temperature control was crucial for this step. Too high, and the flying sword would melt. Too low, and the desired effect of tempering would not be achieved. It was crucial to have the spirit weapon burn at a scarlet, transparent color. Through the past month, Su Zimo had failed countless times at just the tempering step. After a brief moment, the flying sword in the weapon tripod began to turn red. Under the continued burning of the flames, the sword's body gleamed with a bright red. Su Zimo maintained his control and placed the flying sword at the bottom of the tripod before conjuring a hammer using spirit chi to start the tempering process. Cling, clang. Tempering can not only eliminate even more impurities, it can strengthen the sturdiness of the sword as well. Out of all 6 steps, this step was where technique was most important, and every weapon refinement master had their own way of doing things. Su Zimo went about it with pure brute strength as he knocked at the sword. The disheveled old man who was watching him frowned. Su Zimo was way too rough in his technique and was no different from blacksmiths of the mortal world. At the same time, Feng Haoyu had begun tempering his flying sword as well. Unlike Su Zimo, Feng Haoyu was much cleaner in his tempering skills. Feng Haoyu had a wind spirit root, and because of that, the element of wind spirit chi was present in the hammer he conjured to strike at the flying sword. Because of that, the tempered sword would be more agile and swifter. While hammering, the sharpness of the sword was gradually revealed too. It was clear that Feng Haoyu was experienced through his technique and faster. Before long, he was almost caught up to Su Zimo. After 5 minutes, Su Zimo heaved out a sigh of relief. He was done with tempering. For a pseudo-spirit weapon, the final step would be to just throw the scarlet flying sword into cold water for the quenching step. However, Su Zimo had an idea. Since this flying sword had a hilt and was imperfect to begin with, he could attempt spirit gathering with it. For the past month, Su Zimo had already destroyed tens of flying swords without a single success on spirit gathering. Based on what the inner sect disciples mentioned, there was no technique required for spirit gathering, and it was more of a luck thing. The luckier one was, the higher the chances of success. But of course, that was on the pretext that there were no major issues with the 4 previous steps. After tempering, Su Zimo did not shift the flying sword out of the weapon tripod and instead glared at the spirit chi within it keenly. Is he thinking of spirit gathering? If he manages to succeed, that'll be amazing. Humph. I think he's thinking too highly of himself trying to attempt spirit gathering after a single month into weapon refinement. A series of discussions filled with shock and ridicule broke out around them. Casting away all distractions, Su Zimo calmed his mind. This was a step that required absolute focus from the weapon refinement master without any bit of distractions. Taking in a deep breath of air, he controlled the spirit chi within the tripod and willed it towards the scarlet flying sword. Through the pressure, a pattern appeared vaguely on the sword. It was faint and barely formed. Look, a spirit pattern. It's really a spirit pattern, but it has yet to take shape. Could he really manage to create an inferior-grade flying sword? Right then, Feng Haoyu was just done with his tempering step as well. When he heard the discussions, his heart skipped a beat as he turned towards Su Zimo. If Su Zimo had managed to create an inferior-grade spirit weapon, he would have to take the gambit and attempt spirit gathering too. However, Feng Haoyu had no confidence about it. After all, spirit gathering was way too difficult, and he had yet to succeed at it too. The disheveled old man glared at the flying sword within the tripod fixedly, sweat forming on his palms. He was even more nervous than Su Zimo. Piak. Right then, a crisp sound rang out from Su Zimo's weapon tripod. It was over. Su Zimo lamented internally. What followed was a booming sound as the flying sword exploded with its shards striking at the interiors of the weapon tripod. He had failed. However, it was to be expected. Su Zimo shook his head and chuckled in exasperation. The disheveled old man sighed gently. At the side, Shui looked on with pity. At that, Feng Haoyu was finally relieved. Because Su Zimo's flying sword had exploded, Feng Haoyu had no intention to attempt spirit gathering as well. Instead, he took out the pseudo-spirit weapon from his tripod and dipped it in cold water. Clack! A thick, white smoke billowed out from the water basin. The flying sword was successfully created with a sharp gleam and a suffocating aura. Feng Haoyu placed the flying sword at the front desk and awaited the evaluation results. Right as Su Zimo kept his weapon tripod, a loud voice boomed out in the hall. The level of one's spirit fire isn't listed as one of the 6 steps of weapon refinement. Don't think that you'll become a weapon refinement master just because you can cultivate a level 3 spirit fire. Su Zimo turned to the voice and met with Feng Haoyu's cold, sneering gaze. With a fake smile, Feng Haoyu continued, "Junior brother Su, one has to be tread steadily. If one were to attempt flying before they can even walk, they might end up falling twice as heavily." Su Zimo furrowed his brows slightly. The both of them had only met a couple of times before and had never spoken nor crossed one another's paths. Yet, for some unknown reason, Feng Haoyu had a strong enmity towards him. It was particularly so today. "Well said, junior brother Feng. Fufu, some people are way over their heads because they have a level 3 spirit fire. Know your place." The disciples who spoke were not from Weapon Peak. They were Spirit Peak disciples who had come to take the test. There was naturally no way they would give up on a chance to take sides with Feng Haoyu by mocking Su Zimo at such a juncture. "Stop with all that salty talk. How about talking again after any of you can get a level 3 spirit fire?" Shui could not help but stand up and scoff coldly. Many of the Spirit Peak disciples found themselves speechless as they looked awful. No matter what, even if Su Zimo had failed in spirit gathering, it was a fact that he had managed to cultivate a level 3 spirit fire. No one from the 5 peaks could match that. Feng Haoyu continued, "Junior brother Su, don't take this loss to heart. We've still got the 5 peaks face-off at the end of the year. I hope that you'll be able to win me by then." Su Zimo looked at Feng Haoyu indifferently without replying. The disheveled old man stood at the side watching without saying anything. At the end of the day, he was a senior and was naturally not bothered with the verbal squabbles between disciples. After a while, the disciple hosting the test declared, "Even though all of you crafted a pseudo-spirit weapon, Feng Haoyu's flying sword has a better quality and he was faster. As such, he is the first place for this test." Many Spirit Peak disciples began cheering. Feng Haoyu grinned as he looked past Su Zimo to the disheveled old man. Bowing slightly, he spoke, "Peak Master, please take me to observe the projections of weapon refinement left behind by seniors of the sect." "MMM." The disheveled old man nodded nonchalantly. "You're naturally qualified since you took first place." Thereafter, he yanked Su Zimo by the arm and commented casually, "Come on, lad. You'll go have a look too." Su Zimo froze for a moment. Feng Haoyu frowned and said gruffly, "Su Zimo doesn't even have a ranking place in this test because he failed to create a weapon. So, he isn't qualified to watch it. Are you sure what you're doing is appropriate, Peak Master?" "Indeed, it's inappropriate." The disheveled old man nodded in agreement before grinning. "But I don't care." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.